space, we got to come up and out. Okay, so can we take like 5 minutes to just stretch a little bit while they convert over to this time, right? Yeah, okay.
So Dr. Kate Truitt is on next. She planned to be here. The flight was canceled yesterday out of LAX. So we're doing everything we can to give you an equivalent experience, but you're getting to firsthand experience the power of connectedness through the internet and the Zoom pass, and with great gratitude that we have that connectivity, but also our resilience in working through it. So I want to thank Brad back there and the technical staff of the Falls and Dr. Nordstrom for making it possible for Kate to be here. In fact, she's already been with us. She's on a webcam back there in the back of the room. She's been able to see everything that we've been doing, hear everything that we've been doing, and she's going to be guiding us through this. So she's going to be on stage. My lovely assistant for the morning, our lovely assistant, is Ms. Victoria Wright, who's going to be helping us with this because Derek, Victoria, and I, along with other people, took Dr. Truitt's course in LA. Late last year, something like that. And it's really changed our lives. So we're going to be the hands that Kate can't be today, but she's going to be supporting us through the process with her information.
Can I ask, could you make her face fill up that for just a moment so she can just say hi and we can connect with you, Kate? And then we can take, yes, okay, you go ahead and pick up it. We just want to connect and say hi to you.
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Brilliant, okay.
Okay, so whenever you're ready, we can just, we'll shrink your picture of you and then go back to your presentation. Do you want to shrink it now, or you can decide if you want to say something and then start the presentation, whatever you want, okay?
Either way, are we jumping in? We're going?
It's you.
Okay, it's to me, all right. So hi everybody, and I'm so bummed to not be there. I spent all day yesterday at LAX trying to catch a flight, and very gratefully havening because they just kept pushing me to the next one on standby, and the final flight they said, yep, you're the only one not getting on this one at 2:30. So it's really nice to have a tool that I can immediately sink into and regulate my nervous system. So a little bit about my background. I'm a neuroscientist and a clinical psychologist. I've been specializing in trauma since 1999. I started working in rat labs. At the time, I had really severe social anxiety, and rats don't judge nor reject. And so it's pretty safe to hang out with them all of the time. And my journey's been really expansive and complicated, as many of ours have been. And the final thing that really shifted my world experience, and as Derek mentioned, changed the way I practice as a psychologist and the way my team practices, is really the havening techniques. I started learning psychosensory techniques back in 2004 with EMDR. I have a master's in psychophysiology, so I've been studying heart rate variability, galvanic skin response, event-related potentials, again, since 1999. But when the psychosensory work started to come into the clinical field in psychology and the mental health realm, it really highlighted something that I think most of us know intuitively, which is we can't think our way out of anxiety. We can't think our way out of trauma. And I'll be talking a lot more about that in the course of this morning. And Derek's already done a beautiful setup for us and really moving forward and understanding this. But what I'd like to do first is start with a little exercise that highlights really what Derek's been talking about. Our system wants to be healthy and balanced and strong. And no matter what's going on in the world around us, our brain is going to be seeking to do two things. First and foremost, survive, because nothing matters if we're dead. And then second of all, it's going to be searching for glimmers of hope to keep us going forward. And I even look at suicide as a version of hope and survival. It's the brain saying, I need a back door out. And so everything that our brain is doing is saying, how do I find meaningfulness and purpose so that I can keep taking the next step? And so just before we dive in, I want to do a little exercise that really highlights that. So about a year ago, I adopted a thoroughbred off the racetrack, and that horse, he's now 4 years old, but 3 years old at the time, has brought me so many immeasurable smiles. And I was at a state of starting to burn out. I have been expanding my work amazingly, and it's been great. But by the same token, sometimes it's hard to find those smiles. And this was a smile that he gave me one day that I managed to capture. So I think as humans, as clinicians, as practitioners, one of the most important jobs we have is to help our patients remember to find the little moments of hope. And to do that, we have to practice and live that ourselves. So I'd like to invite everybody to just take a moment and take a gentle breath in and a long, slow exhale. And close your eyes and notice a smile. Maybe it's a smile you shared with somebody this morning. Perhaps it's a smile from a child, or here, a horse. Maybe a smile from your dog. My dog smiles. Notice what happens as you tune into that smile that you experienced. Notice perhaps, do you start to smile? Do you notice a loosening in your jaw, a shifting in your breath? Do your shoulders start to relax and release? Is there a color tied to that smile? I'd like to invite you to open your eyes and look around and notice those around you. Are there more smiles? And I can't see I get to see all of your lovely heads, so I'm hoping that some of you perhaps are smiling. But the power of our body simply to connect with a smile is amazing. Our system wants to trend towards calm. Our system wants to trend towards balance. And one of the things that I know we all see on a day-to-day basis is these individuals who show up in our offices whose body has lost the ability to trend towards that balance. And havening is one of the greatest gifts to help us connect back to that balance and help our brain get back into the homeostatic state that it's supposed to be in, that for sometimes was taken from us before we were even brought into this world, before birth, like Derek was just talking about. So what is havening? It's new. It's came out of the psychosensory techniques such as EMDR and tapping. And it was developed by two twin brothers. They're in their 70s now. They both went to Harvard at 16 years old, the Rudin brothers, Ronald and Steve. And back in the early 2000s, when tapping and EMDR was starting to pick up some steam, one of their colleagues approached them and said, "Hey, do you guys have any idea as to why these work? There isn't a lot of literature." And they didn't know. And given who they are and what they do, so Ron's a MD with a PhD in neurochemistry, and Steven's a dentist, and he's a specialist in dental phobias. They started thinking, this is really interesting. What is this EMDR eye movement thing? So EMDR is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. And then tapping is also known as the emotion freedom techniques or thought field treatment. And they did a deep dive into those two modalities and started also exploring, why does acupuncture work? Why does acupressure work? And, as we already knew, those tactile fibers, they go into the limbic system, and touch is soothing. And why? What's actually happening in the brain when somebody feels relaxed or calm after a massage? Or when somebody starts having an energetic release and crying in the course of a massage. And their explorations took them about 10, 12 years of deep diving into the deeper levels of neural functioning around these touch-based modalities. Over the course of their explorations, they originally thought, oh, this is memory reconsolidation, that's why it's happening. They went down the same route as, oh, REM sleep is what's going on. It's those eye movements going back and forth that's helping the brain shift the information it's receiving. And then they had this moment of realization that when people did this, and when they simply sang songs or played category games or counted numbers, the brain would release trauma or stress in the time course of minutes, which was profound and weird, frankly. And so they started exploring synaptically what would be happening in that moment. And through those explorations, spent several more years developing what we now know as havening. Now, how many people in this room, and I can see hands, so I always love asking this question, heard about havening prior to Angie, Derek, and Victoria bringing it forward to you guys? Okay, a couple, cool. I noticed most of the hands did not go up. And that's because the people who are bringing this forward into the field are early adopters. And so thank you for being here and being open to being an early adopter. And I know that's also part of the ALF community is how do we take what works and integrate it and do that safely? But first and foremost, let's be in service of our patients. And that's what havening gives a new opportunity to do. So I heard about havening at first in 2014. I had been living with PTSD for 5 years. And actually exactly 10 years ago yesterday, I had a traumatic loss where my partner of 10 years unexpectedly passed away. And it was a week before our wedding. I came home and I couldn't save him. I found him and I couldn't save him. And my entire world went upside down. And it was infuriating and humbling as a trauma specialist to not be able to live my life anymore because I had trauma. Really incredibly annoying. And so I stepped back and I changed my entire career. I have an MBA as well as my MA and my PhD in neuroscience and psychology. And so I just leaned onto that MBA and started consulting and going all over the nation, working with programs, developing research initiatives. And a retreat that I went on when I was consulting, I ran into somebody who started telling me about havening, and it was kind of bonkers. We're sitting there talking about trauma. I wasn't talking about my trauma, but that's what we were there to learn and speak about for that organization. And this fellow Bill Souls started telling me about doing this thing and singing Old MacDonald and how that will cure trauma. So weird. And I thought he was completely nuts. But I had PTSD, and I don't know if any of you have ever had a moment where you've been driven by something by your brain that is out of your control, that you'll just try anything. And I think sometimes that's why the patients will, trust us so immeasurably, is that desperation and, like I spoke about before, that glimmer of hope. So I went home and I bought all of Ronald Rudin's books. He's written a couple. I started reading his literature. I bought his DVDs and watched his DVDs. And he started citing study after study after study that I've written about, because I've written about 300, 400 pages on trauma and in the course of my research. I was like, there's something to this. And lo and behold, my then boyfriend had to be in New York for a conference that same weekend. And I'll be honest, I was a nightmare to date. The lovely man that was my then boyfriend is now my husband. And I never thought I'd get married again. I had so much trauma around weddings. I had just going to the grocery store and seeing the wedding magazines and all that would bring up trauma reactions for me. I was just kind of a nightmare of trauma stimuli for just day-to-day life attachment stuff. And so I was kind of casually dating this guy just because he lived an hour and a half away from me, so that was safe. But he said, hey, I have to be in New York. Do you want to go to this conference? And so I went with him. And within 15 minutes in a breakout group in a conference just like this, in a room just like this, one of the founders, Stephen Rudin, sat down and collapsed what was the intractable memory. And it was the craziest thing because my vision went from narrow to wide. And I hear this from my patients a lot, where all of a sudden you can see the world around you in a different way. And we know that's part of a stress or trauma response. And all he did again was have me sing songs while he applied the havening touch. It's really incredibly mind-blowing, and I got my life back. Like I said, I'm married. I never thought I'd be married. I never thought that I could be in an intimate relationship connected to somebody again, because my brain taught me that anybody I loved, when they left, and if I didn't hear from them, they were dead. And I would do extreme things to go check on and make sure that they were okay, including driving hours to check on my parents after they left me when we had dinner sometimes. I didn't hear from them because, they fell asleep because, they're in their 70s. They go to bed early. And I would drive 2 hours to their house to make sure they're okay, because my brain would be running the show. I couldn't think my way out of knowing that they're okay. They're just asleep. So it's a really, really powerful thing. And the way I got my brain back taught me that this is something that I need to bring forward to the world. And I train in 2 separate tracks, and we'll talk about that. So I have my mental health trainings that I do. And then I'm blessed to be invited to come to organizations like ALF and others and teach a different track of havening that I call CPR for the amygdala. And it's where you're not doing trauma work. You're not reprocessing. You're simply getting into how do you help manage the ambient distress that's showing up when little receptors are triggering and running the show, so that you can go in and do the work that you need to do in your clinical space. Give the patient some tools to take home and manage their nervous system while you send them to a collaborating practitioner such as myself or somebody that we've trained across the nation. So what does havening do? First and foremost, and I think for what matters for the work that you all do, is it helps return the body to the homeostatic state. And in doing so, it's widening a window of tolerance, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that is. The system wants to be balanced again, but we also know, as Derek just mentioned, that as the system's returning to balance, what can happen is these experiences start to trigger other things. And in the course of other things being triggered, we start to see trauma reactions or energy release. And so you're doing a procedure on somebody and that energy releases, and all of a sudden they're in a different state. They're crying or they're having a hard time breathing. And you're sitting there going, I don't have a tool for this. And my goal is to make sure you have a tool for this. Havening is the tool for that. In addition, while we're widening that window, we're boosting brain resilience. We're putting neuroplasticity to work. And in doing that, we're helping the nervous system calm down and learn a new way of being. Clinically, in the mental health space, we use it to proactively depotentiate traumatically encoded experiences. And we can collapse subsequently encoded networks that have built. And those are those deeply rooted networks of I'm not good enough, I'm ashamed, I'm bad. That's not what we're going to be teaching today, because that's not the work that you're there to do. But it's just something to know that that's available if something like that's showing up in your space. If you have a patient who has a felt sense of just being a bad person or not being worthy of something. It can also enhance goal and achievement motivation. So we can train our brain to think in a healthy and empowered way. And again, this little purple brain here reduces present moment distress. So that's that ambiance. If somebody sits down in your chair and they're really nervous about a procedure, you have a tool right away to help their system regulate so that they feel safer and calmer. And ultimately, it protects against vicarious traumatization. Anybody here ever experienced secondary trauma after working with somebody, or carried the stress of a patient's experience forward? They've just told you something that's so heartbreaking and devastating that you can't get that out of your mind. That disrupts your ability to be present with every other patient. And so this havening gives us a quick 2-minute hack that calms us down and releases so that we're not carrying that experience forward. And frankly, to me, that's one of the coolest things. I do a lot of work with first responders. I go into, do a lot of work with religious leaders who are the people who receive this stuff, who, again, don't have training on how to help themselves or their patients through trauma. And I teach them how to do these core tools so they can be their best selves. And I want to do that for you as well. So my roadmap for us this morning is to introduce the underlying principles of the havening techniques. In doing that, we'll be also exploring the impact of traumatic and stressfully encoded experiences on the mind and body, and teaching you how to successfully use havening as a tool for autonomic nervous system regulation. So now notice that again, we're not getting into actual trauma depotentiation. So we're not doing trauma treatment here. What we're doing is helping to regulate the system so that their thinking brains are online, or if you're in a moment of heightened stress, you can get your thinking brain back online. And sometimes, I mean, living in LA, that's just driving into work and 4 people cut you off coming into the office. That happens on a regular basis. I don't know what it is about LA drivers. I'm from Kansas City and I'm not used to it at all. But it's simply going, wow, that was an adventure coming into work. I'm going to take 5 minutes to do this and help my system calm down so that now I can be my best self for my team and my patients. So it's all brain hacks for you, for your patients. And honestly, when these core tools, please go teach them to everybody. Like I said, it's CPR for the amygdala. We want to be helping everybody be in a better, stronger relationship with their mind and body. And ultimately, the final part of the talk today is to teach you some super easy hacks for building neuroplasticity, for giving you a new opportunity to create a freeway in your brain that goes in the direction that you want to. So Viktor Frankl is kind of one of my heroes. He is one of my heroes. And he created a system of functioning that transcended something that so many of us struggle with, which is, how do you always find purpose and meaning? And the way he did that is to constantly seek it out and build the freeways in his brain towards purpose and meaning in every moment. He was a psychiatrist, and he was interned at Auschwitz, and he watched his entire family die. And yet he still came out of that, survived, and created a meaningful, purposeful life. This is a really, really important quote from him. It's the idea of between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, what happens when that response doesn't exist? And that can be anywhere from actual full-blown PTSD like I had. That can be panic attacks. Or that can be, again, sitting in a chair and the body moving back towards homeostasis, and the feeling of calm being so jarring that the amygdala feels threatened and hijacks us. And that happens. Sometimes our system is so not used to feeling calm that being calm is actually triggering and very, very scary. That's what Derek was just talking about, how our system can become so aligned with using resources in a certain way that it depletes everything else. So havening is a brain hack to create that space. And my goal for humanity, and it's kind of my life's mission, is to have this experience that Calvin is having in this cartoon strip. Because we all will fall flat on our face. A couple of weeks ago, I did a 2-day training, and of course, because this is how the universe works, I was talking about this slide, and I turned and I walked right into the whiteboard and fell. Literally fell. And it hurt. But it just was the perfect opportunity to jump up and go, oh, ta-da! And then I, limped for a couple hours. But every single time I was limping, I just kept we as a team were joking about it. And as at the training, we were joking about it of, that's the opportunity for healing right there. Helping our system consistently remember that whatever happens is a ta-da moment, because life is going to happen. And that really is what resiliency is all about. And the question is, what happens when our brain doesn't have a resiliency, when we're not either born with it, or when life has eroded our brain to the point which we're living in a state of stress or trauma. And that can simply be living with chronic pain. And we'll talk about using Havening for chronic pain. It's an incredible, useful tool. But first, let's step back and just kind of highlight general functioning of the brain. I know you guys have been hanging out with Derek and Angie, so you've been knee deep in brain all day and since Thursday. So it's wonderful to just do quick broad strokes here. But I think there's a lot of hubris in humanity in that we think that we can think our way through everything. And, you know, we have this beautiful prefrontal cortex that is able to, you know, it's the reason that I'm here in Los Angeles having this conversation with you, right? Because our amazing human brains were able to come up with things like Bluetooth and Zoom, and, you know, Brad, thank goodness, was able to connect all of this together. And that's incredible. So the hubris in some ways is well earned. We think we can think our way through anything. But our reptilian brain came first. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for that little section of our brain. And so it's only fair that that part of our brain actually holds the most power to manage our system when things get rocky. And boy, does it ever. So the heart of our system is this tiny, tiny, tiny little almond-shaped system called the amygdala. And we actually have two of them, the amygdalae. And there's the left one and the right one, and they both have very, very different purposes. So we call the amygdala Amy. And so if there's any Amy's in the group, just notice that you might have a little more vigilance when I say the word Amy, because you might go, oh, me? And yes, you and all of us, because we all have them. And Amy is fundamentally responsible for our survival. I had a patient a couple of weeks ago who came into my office and sat down, and she said, I was trying to look at how do we remove Amy? How do we just take her out back? Because, man, she's really running the show, and I don't like it. And I asked her what she found out. She goes, well, that's basically what a frontal lobectomy is. I'm like, yeah, exactly. We can't remove her. All we can do is scramble the prefrontal cortex, and then she's less effective. So she has a strong and powerful relationship with our thinking brain. But Amy is so much more powerful than our thinking brain in the face of threat. And that goes back to this idea that nothing else matters if we're dead. But what that also highlights is Amy doesn't care about quality of life. She doesn't care if we're happy. She's not looking out for the smiles. What she's looking for every single day is, are there people around me and am I safe? And how do we stay safe? First and foremost is we look for the danger. And that's what she's doing all the time. And she's doing it to the tune of 75 milliseconds. Anybody have any idea of how fast that is? That's 4 times faster than the blink of an eye. So just everybody blink your eyes for a moment. 4 times faster than that. So blink, blink, 4 times faster. She's there assessing and guiding the information that our brain is accessing and how it's using it. So it's so, so, so fast. Our thinking brain still shows up in the process, but it takes 35 milliseconds for our thinking brain to start to proactively engage in the experience and make sense of the data that's showing up. So think about 75 milliseconds, 350 milliseconds. And Amy has an entire set of nuclei that she's looking into and resourcing and sourcing data from to see if something's threatening before our thinking brain even knows anything about it. And all that data she's sourcing, if you just imagine a 4D matrix of 18 different variables. That's what we know so far. And I'm sure it's way more complicated than that. And, you know, it's we're in the second decade of the brain now. So everything we're learning is still new and exciting. But 18 different variables that she's going to be looking out for once an event is to her is important enough for her to have remembered it. So that could be the color of a shirt. If somebody, I don't know if you can see, there's a butterfly pillow in my background here. If somebody had a butterfly phobia, guess what? Their little brain has definitely tuned into the fact that there is a butterfly on that pillow back there. The rest of us probably wouldn't have ever noticed if I hadn't just mentioned it. That's why I put it there. So it's amazing how on point she is to keep us safe and to keep us alive. And so what does that look like in a moment of stress? So this research is specific to PTSD, but what I want you to know is that this is what our brain does in the face of any of those 18 variables. Our brain is going to say, wow, I'm going to process this information differently. And once that information starts being processed differently, the rest of the information in our environment is going to be different too. So what that can look like is, I'll tell the story of my own dentist. As a child, I had a wonderful dentist who had fabulous TVs and always remembered, I think his dental assistant kept a record of all of the kiddos' favorite TV shows. And then he would go, if they didn't have the VHS already, he would go buy the VHS. And so you'd walk in and they'd already have your favorite TV show on, which was so sweet. And so I always got to watch My Little Pony when I went to the dentist, because that was my favorite. And he was loving and kind and wonderful. And so I always had really positive experiences going to the dentist. Now, I had a sexual assault when I was 13 that created a lot of trauma in different areas of my body, one that specifically could have been tied to dentistry. And my brain and body were still safe to go see him because I had all of these networks connected to safety with him. So my left amygdala is tribe focused. And so my left amygdala would go, could be scary, but he's cool. When I moved to LA, I had to find another dentist, and I initially went to a male. And my right amygdala showed up and said, this is terrifying, get out. This is an unsafe person, you don't know them. And so I had to only go to female dentists for quite some time until I did EMDR on my trauma. It was amazing how the context was so different. Even though all the procedures, all the instruments, everything was still the same. It was simply walking into a different environment with a different man that my brain said, no way. Even though I already knew everything he was going to do, my teeth were fine, but it was simply the fact that having a person I didn't know in that close of proximity to me, my brain went haywire. I'm pretty sure some of you have experienced this with your patients. Now, the new dentist that I went to, God bless him, he didn't know what to do with me. And I simply just, I got to go. And I left. And I was in tears. And I was choked up. And I was having a panic attack. Poor guy. I did call him later just because that's who I am. And I said, I'm so sorry. I just can't come back. I have trauma. But had he had havening in that moment, and had he been able to say, hey, here's this tool, or had his dental assistant been able to sit with me and teach me havening, it would have been a very different experience, because he would have been able in that moment, without having to know anything about my history, deactivate those AMPA receptors that showed up in that moment. But because he didn't, what happened is my control brain, I think you guys can see my arrow, right? This here was what walked into the room, me oblivious to the fact that I would have any trauma response to this individual. Walked into this room, sat down in the chair, he put his mask on, he rolls, and he's fine until he rolls his chair up, and as soon as he rolls his chair up and he has his shoulders over me, I went into a panic response. My brain then looked like this PTSD brain. So notice in the control brain, our brain has a stimulus, and what this looks like here, the stimulus is the sound of ah, ah. So all of your brains, unless you have a trauma response to that sound, did this exact process here, which means the brain goes, hi, data. And nope, we don't really care about that data. Once the amygdala gets involved, our brain goes, hi, data, and it's like the brain explodes in the processing and doesn't know what to do with it. There's no synthesis for that 3,500 millisecond thinking brain to the 400 and forward brain to start to be a part of the feedback loop. And instead, the brain's just going, I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble, I'm in trouble. Now, my previous dentist was safe enough because I'd had 12 years with him. But the new dentist I had no context with. When I went to the female dentist, I had anxiety because of what had happened with the previous dentist. So I had some, at that point, medical trauma, even though he did nothing wrong. But my brain was able to sink into enough of female dentist, okay, I can hold on to itself. So Amy didn't hijack me. But when Amy hijacks, this is what happens. The brain is not able to synthesize and bring all of the data together. And we're lost in the world of Amy going, we're going to die. We're going to die, we're going to die, we're going to die. And that's what so many of our patients are sitting there experiencing. But then their thinking brain is whispering, I know you're safe. And that's what my thinking brain was doing with that dentist. It's going, this is safe. I'm paying this person to help me. I know he's safe. But Amy's going, no, you're going to die. So just take a moment and notice, have you had that experience? And I know Derek shared with me on Thursday about a patient who I believe is a survivor of a car accident who needed to have the surgery. And as soon as that person started to go back into a prone position, their amygdala and body would go, no, this is not okay. And so that patient starts to, their brain gets in their own way of getting the help they need. And so havening is a hack to give their brain what it needs, to teach them something to do. And I think about it as it's CPR for the amygdala. It's wrapping a warm, fuzzy blanket around the amygdala so that we don't have this disparate information processing. And instead our brain goes back into normal information processing of this person's safe. I'm choosing to be here. Choice is a huge part of survival and resiliency. I'm choosing to be here because I need this help. And as soon as the brain can start to pull back into, I'm choosing to be here, this person's safe, then the work that needs to be done can get done. And both you and the patient have the data that, wow, there's some additional healing that could happen here. Let's find one of our collaborating treatment members in the community who can do the more intensive trauma work. And something like that sexual assault that I experienced, that's a one-session treatment now. And we see that all the time with our patients. They come in, they've had an assault, a car accident, held up at gunpoint. We've had a lot of fires here and there's a number of shootings going on all over the nation. And we have havening providers who are doing one session system modulating reprocessing experiences. But again, that's trauma treatment. And so we can help somebody and we do our session and then they go back into the world. So it's such a huge opportunity for healing. And so that trauma response in your chair, in your office, kind of becomes an opportunity to go, wow, let's help your brain heal. I'm going to send you to this person to do that work. Now, it's not always one session. I don't want it to be painted like a magical paintbrush. Obviously, if there's other trauma there, the work takes longer. But havening works through harnessing the brain's natural desire and our brain's natural tendency to trend towards that homeostatic balance. Our brain doesn't want us to feel bad. It doesn't want to be using energy inappropriately. And Mother Nature, in all of her infinite wisdom, created a system within us that harnesses our innate ability to heal. And so just like she's keeping us in a survival state, she's making sure we survive when we encode a traumatic experience. She's also given us a get out of jail free card for when we no longer need to hold on to that. We just didn't know it before. And that's the gift that the Rudins have given all of us, is this get out of jail free card of, okay, I survived that. And now I don't need to remember it anymore because I've already survived it. So take a moment and think about, what do you do when you're stressed out? Do you kind of hold your arms, rub your forehead, tension headaches, pick at your nails, rub your hands? All of those things, as Derek mentioned earlier, activate those C-tactile fibers that have a direct route into our limbic system. What we know that they also do is they generate something called a delta wave. Touch is the most primitive form of healing. What do you do when you see somebody's having a hard day? Might walk up to them and go, rub their arm or their shoulder if you know them well enough. Hey, you doing okay? yesterday or 2 days ago on Thursday, my late fiance's best friend, who's now one of my dearest friends, came up so that we could have an evening together to, be an honorarium for his death. And the first thing we did when we walked in is we hugged. Why? Because it's a big day. Why? Because we love each other. Why? Because we both naturally needed our nervous system to have that tactile experience of closeness and connection and tribe. Because that was a big day and a huge loss for both of us. There wasn't a question of do we hug, we just did it. And that's what we do. Our brains and our bodies have created this system for healing. We trend towards that in our interactions with others. And that's what havening is. It's saying we're going to harness what our system will do no matter what. You just notice what happens as you watch this video. Anybody notice a shift in your physiology watching that little smile? That's the power of havening. I mean, that's the power of the nervous system. They just called it havening. That's what our brain and our body wants. It's simply saying, warm, fuzzy blanket. Calm, soothing touch. That's the opposite of being in a survival threat mode. That little child is so safe in that moment. And that's the gift that we're giving ourselves. That soothing touch. That's the gift that we're giving our patients. And that's what calms Amy down, because that's reptilian, that's primal. So self-havening has 4 primary touches. The first one is just like I was showing you, is a nice gentle hug. And it's that exact same thing. We're just giving ourselves a hug and calming the system down. Next, gentle, just like you're washing your hands under warm water. Finally, across the brow and under the eyes. It's all really gentle and soothing. The main consideration is, just like you saw in that video, what would we be doing to take care of an infant? Or if you're petting a kitty cat. I'm going to adjust the screen for a second here. We don't want to be doing this. That's not very soothing. It's nice and easy and calm. Now, when we're teaching this to patients for the first time, there's a certain structure that I like to teach them that gives them the regulated structure. And so you start across the brow. I'm going to invite everybody to join me here. We go across the brow and around the eyes, down the arms to the hands. Again, across the brow, around the eyes, down the arms to the hands. It's really hard to do that really, really fast. That's why I like this structure. And it's actionable for them and it's attainable. They won't be asking you, well, do I do this or this or this, or how many times do I do each? You just teach them this lovely structure around the face, across the cheeks, down the arms to the hands. Are you noticing anything shifting or changing as you're doing that? Or even as you're watching me do it. That's one of the other beautiful things about havening, is we have these little mirror neurons that attune to what other people are doing. And so even the simple act of you applying the havening touch, your patient's brain will start to get into the havened state. We have a couples therapist on my team who had a couple that was really, really agitated. And in the moment of agitation, neither of them were willing to go into the havening touch. And so she just basically said, fine. We're going to sit here, but I'm going to do this and modulate you. And within a couple of minutes, they started doing it too, because their system calmed down enough that they could apply their own work and modulate their system. So it's really, really, really powerful in our ability to be in relationship. So we have like I mentioned, a left amygdala and a right amygdala, and our left amygdala trends towards tribe. And that's exactly what that Billy Madison video is highlighting. As soon as that poor little boy was about to get bullied, and he started to go into right amygdala, started to feel ashamed and guilty and embarrassed. But then Billy Madison comes out and goes, all the cool people pee their pants. That's what we do. So what did Billy Madison do? I don't know if the writers knew this, but we all smiled because we're like, oh, that was so kind, because left amygdala, came on board and said, oh, tribe is not going to reject me. And so matching somebody and using our system to modulate them is connecting with tribe. It's connecting with that sense of safety and calm. So what is actually happening within that is that we're generating a delta wave. So at any given time, our brain has different electrochemical properties. We can have alpha waves, we have beta waves, gamma waves, theta, delta. If any of you have studied or done neurofeedback, you know this. We're supposed to be operating at all different levels all the time. And actually, you can do something called a brain map to find out where is your brain functioning appropriately and inappropriately. In a state of extraordinary consciousness, which can be excitement, but can also be trauma, our brain releases what's called a hyper gamma wave. So how many people here like roller coasters? Okay, yeah. How many people hate them? Yeah, okay, yeah. There's always, and it's reasonable because we're not supposed to strap ourselves into a metal thing and plummet towards the earth at 60 miles per hour. We're not supposed to do that as humans. But for some of us, we really love the adrenaline. And so for some of us, we go, this is awesome. For others of us, our brain goes, you're insane. We're not supposed to do it. But in both states of the excitement, this is awesome, and the you're insane, the brain is in an extraordinary state of hyper gamma awareness. When it's the you're insane part, that's when Amy's on board and starts remembering and encoding. And that's when we start to get in trouble. But notice here, so we have hyper gamma, 100 to 200 hertz. Look at what's the opposite. It's delta wave state. The delta wave generates the electrochemical opposite of what encodes. Now, the only time we have a delta wave presence in our system as the majority presence, so again, we have delta wave all the time, but the only time it's present as the majority is when we are in what's called deep sleep. And that's memory reconsolidation. In that deep sleep state, our brain is releasing serotonin, it's releasing GABA, and it's releasing the human growth hormone. So everybody knows what serotonin is? Does that feel good? Remember the commercials, those little triangles going across the synapse and going, when you have more triangles, you're not going to be depressed. That's what serotonin is. GABA is calming. If you've ever been prescribed gabapentin, or if you've ever prescribed gabapentin, it's because why? You're trying to help the system modulate and calm down. GABA really is a big friend of the parasympathetic nervous system, saying, let's breathe, let's hang out. And the human growth hormone is a specific hormone that our system releases so that it'll source all the toxic waste of the day, basically, and help all of our cells turn over so that we're better prepared for the next day. So if you ever have a night where you don't sleep very well and you feel kind of crummy or foggy or drowsy the next day, it's probably in part because of that. Your brain didn't get enough time with the human growth hormone to replenish and renew. But these experiences that are hyper gamma encoded in the amygdala, the human growth hormone in our deep sleep state, and keep running back here, amygdala. Imagine amygdala is right in between the eyeball and the ear. In our deep sleep state, those cells don't get touched by those delta waves. They don't get reprocessed. And so what I wish, what the Rudins identified is that we can generate the delta wave in a waking state at an exponentially higher manner than we have in any other time in our normal human processing experience. So Harper did a wonderful study that looked at ER, event-related potentials, and did brain mapping with individuals while applying traditional touches that are tied to the psychosensory techniques. And what he identified here is that there's core touches, or core locations, I'm sorry, should say cheek and forehead, this is an older slide, that generate an exponentially higher delta wave. So the highest, up to 90%, is the cheek and across the forehead, and I apologize again for that typo. This generates, in a wake state, 90 times more delta wave than we would have otherwise. The shoulder, 5 to 38. The palms of the hands, 5. You'll notice that they looked at the typical tapping points. They looked at acupressure, acupuncture points. They looked at the lateral eye movements. So in a way, they identified one of the core properties of eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, 12 to 20 times. So they took this data and created the structure that I just taught you to harness the opportunities of generating delta waves proactively in the system. How do we know that this is what's happening with those touches? We measure brain waves. Like I told you, we're a bunch of geeks back here in Los Angeles, and we're looking at neurofeedback. We're doing brain mapping, QEEGs, event-related potentials, which is that wavy line that I showed you earlier. We hang out on Friday night and do that for fun. And so this is a monitoring of one of my associates doing simply hand havening. And you're going to watch how the delta wave presence changes in only doing this. If that's too loud, I can turn it down. So notice going up, just doing this. Stops doing this and it goes right down. So it works. Now you have to take my word for that, but what that is, it's a little QEEG band, and you've probably seen them, in the media, or perhaps you use them in your own practice, that measures different electrochemical activity. Now, what that video also highlights is that we all have different sweet spots. So that was one of my colleagues, Graham, and his sweet spot is his hands. And so as you teach your patients how to do this, and as you start doing your own work, because doing your own work is huge, you'll find that there's one part that you naturally gravitate towards. So I mentioned a little bit of my story. Well, actually, we're going to practice, and I'll get into that in just a minute. So I'd like to take a moment and walk everybody here through a meditation with the havening touch. Gives you an opportunity to feel into what this feels like when your system goes into a delta wave state, The other reason for doing your own work is it allows you to give your patients data about what it looks like and it feels like, because it is very different when we're in a haven state. And being able to describe that and normalize it will help their nervous system go, oh, this is okay. Like I mentioned earlier, sometimes when our system calms down, our brain goes, uh-oh, I'm not supposed to be calm. I'm supposed to be vigilant or hypervigilant. And that's not what we want for our patients in a healthy functional brain, but it's hard for them to trust sometimes that it's okay to be calm. And I certainly had that experience when I started doing my own work. I was used to functioning at a 4 or 5 on an activation scale where 10 is panic and 0 is zen. And as soon as my system started coming out of that 4 or 5, it would sometimes jostle me right back up to a 7 or an 8, which is again and why when we're doing this work for people who have a lot of trauma, working with a mental health provider is really, really important, because you're going to be working to get the system overall back into a state of calm while using the havening tools adjunctively in your clinical space to help modulate their nervous system so that you can accomplish what they're there to accomplish with you. So you all will receive an email that will have the, did I just block it? This meditation as well as a couple other protocols in it. But I'd like for everybody to just take a moment. If you have glasses on, take your glasses off. And we're going to walk through a color of breath meditation. This is an activity in brain hacking and neuroplasticity. So first to start, I'd like to invite everybody to simply take a deep breath, sit back, relax. Passively pay attention to the state of your mind and your body right now. Don't try to change anything. Just notice your breath. Allow your jaw to gently loosen so your teeth are not touching. Allow your eyelids to start to feel heavy if they choose to. Just moving into your body, feeling your feet on the ground. Take a deep breath in and gently hold it. Slowly breathing out. Now I'd like to invite you to start to apply the havening touch. Hands, arms, face, in any order. Noticing again your breath as you continue to apply the havening touch. Notice how your body knows how much air you need. Notice with interest how your breath goes in and out. Feel the pause after you inhale and before you exhale. Notice the gentle pause before drawing another breath. Allow your body to relax and your mind to focus on that soothing, havening touch. And ask yourself, what energy would you like to welcome in today's experience? Invite your mind to ponder the possibilities of being curious or inquisitive, perhaps energized and present. Take a moment to notice a state of being you would like more of in this moment. As you continue self-havening, ask yourself, what if I was? Gently filling in the blank with that chosen energetic state. Again, questioning, asking, what if I was? What if I was curious? What if I was present? What if I was inquisitive? And what if your chosen energetic state had a color? Invite your mind to explore this possibility. What color would it be? Is this a color you have seen in nature or on your life's journeys? And as you invite yourself to be present with your chosen state and its beautifully colored self, Once again, ask yourself, what if I was? Continue to gently apply the gentle havening touch and notice the expansive opportunities of this chosen state. Invite in this color as you deeply inhale, welcoming its energy. And then gently release your breath. Once again, noticing how your body knows just how much air you need. And as you gently return to the room, notice if you feel like you can embody your chosen state. Once again, welcoming this energetic color as you inhale and as you exhale. And bring your attention back to your body and then into the space, opening your eyes. Did anybody notice a shift or a change? Notice the presence of your chosen state. So our system likes to feel good, and then our thinking brain gives us the power to design how our energy moves. And when Amy's running the show, our thinking brain sometimes doesn't have a lot of power, but the one thing that it can do is say, hey, let's do this thing. And simply by starting this thing, our thinking brain gets stronger and our healthy brain can come back online to help our brain and our body heal. But what happens when this, they're so cute. This is one of the most fun slides I've ever made in my life, is exposed to this. Because this is life. Life happens. It would be wonderful if we could stay in the state of the happy giggles and the the gardens. But that's simply not what happens as we grow up and grow older. So I am a child who grew up with a number of what are called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. I had chronic illness throughout my life. When they didn't know what was going on the first year of my life, I was just in and out of doctors regularly. I had an exhausted mother who had a very sick infant daughter and a 3-year-old daughter who was used to being front and center. And when she was no longer front and center, definitely had a very hard time. It's obviously my older sister. And the only time I stopped crying as an infant was when my mom would pick me up. And what I know now as a brain scientist is a huge part of that is as soon as she would pick me up and hold me, she would rock me. And that would give my cerebellum the data it needs to self-soothe, because my body and my brain weren't functioning correctly. And as a chronically ill child, the more pain I was in, the more my brain acclimated to being in chronic pain, and that became my normal state. And that is so many of our patients. And while that can happen as part of the developmental trajectory for a child, that's also what happens when our patients start coming into our offices. And so when we look at bruxism, or I don't have to define what that is, teeth grinding for you guys. We talk, or TMJ, the first time it happens might be related to stress. We know it's a very complicated consideration. But what happens is the more the patients do it, they build a muscle memory around it. And that's where you start talking about the habit of it. And so once the habit develops, it's much harder to break. And even though the stressors may wane, if the system's still in that habit, it's going to wreak havoc on the system. Havening is an opportunity for an intervention there. Now, havening is also an opportunity for an intervention, even if the habit has already developed. So my system developed into a state of chronic illness that I had throughout the bulk of my life, Raynaud's, chronic fatigue. And when I was 30 years old, I developed encephalitis. Contracted it, you don't really develop it, which almost killed me. And then I had brain damage. And so I went from being widowed to having encephalitis, partially because being widowed crashed my immune system so deeply that I was highly susceptible to any virus or bacteria in the environment. And when my immune system crashed and there was a mono outbreak in the clinic I was working in, my body basically went, hey, we know this. This is what we do. And from then on, after the encephalitis, I did a significant amount of rehabilitation and therapy. Most people say they wouldn't know I had brain damage until there's like a really blatant representation of it, which I'm sure will show up at some time in this presentation. But throughout that, my immune system developed a norm again of being chronically fatigued and ill. And I would get tonsillitis every 3 months that would put me back into bed for 3 weeks or so. And the doctor said, we can take your tonsils out, but the risk of going in and doing surgery on your heavily compromised system is huge. Now, here's what's incredible. When I started doing havening daily, and I mean daily, because I literally sit with my patients in Haven 6-7 hours a day, but this was before I was even doing that. When I started doing my own practice with the havening work, before I felt comfortable enough to really integrate this into my clinical space, my system got stronger. And all of a sudden, it's almost as though my brain started to return back to this. Because I was healing my system back into its homeostatic state through simple Deltawave activation and neuroplasticity, through doing these types of exercises like I just walked you through. I put my system back into one of resilience, and one that it had never had before. Now, I'm a guinea pig for myself. I'm a trauma specialist, and so I've got some additional tools in my back pocket, and I'm also, like I said, I have a ton of brain geekery stuff that works, which is super fun. So I had a couple of legs up on some of this, but the simple act of doing my own havening work gave me my brain and my body back to an extent that I never thought possible. On the other side of severe PTSD and 18 months of going in and out of the hospital for encephalitis, which I'm sure you guys know what that is. It's a brain virus. And I had somebody come into my office the other day and said, I've never met another blue dot. And I looked at her and she goes, that's an encephalitis survivor. If you look up encephalitis survivors, they're represented as blue dots on a map. And the red dots are all those who died. There's very rarely blue dots. And so it's the ability to help our brain and our body heal proactively that is honestly a game changer for us as clinicians, and why I'm so delighted to be speaking to you. Again, this is part of my personal mission, is to introduce this. Because most of us have at least one adverse childhood experience. The research shows 80% of us now. I've never met a 20%er. I've never met anybody who does not have a adverse childhood experience. And these experiences are the ones that Amy holds on to and codes and carries forward. And as we have these experiences, Mother Nature, again, has designed us to build out that big matrix of 18 variables. And so any adverse childhood experience gets encoded in our amygdala and starts to lay the track for the way our brain is thinking and functioning in every other area of our life. That's that 75 millisecond hijack. She starts to say, everything's a tiger. Now, a real tiger, that makes sense. If we go all the way back to our caveman days, we want to be on the lookout for tigers. Why? Because if we're alone in the world and a tiger shows up, we're actually not physically strong as a species. We're really, really weak. Our strength is in our prefrontal cortex. And so I think we can all agree on the fact that that tiger is probably going to win if it's hungry. Unless it's the jungle buck, we're pretty much dinner. And so then our brain goes tiger, and it starts to go all tigers, anything reminiscent of a tiger. And then all of those tigers become part of that matrix. And our brain will start to assign resources to those felt tigers, to little black dots in our brain that we go, those are the things that are going to hurt us. And once those things happen or come online and become encoded, our brain has a little library back there, and it's going to keep accessing those things. And just like I shared with my story with the dentist, knowing I'm safe doesn't matter to Amy when she starts to go, you're not safe. And that experience for me had nothing to do with dentistry. I always had great dental experiences. I had everything to do with sexual trauma showing up in that poor dentist chair. And he had no idea what he was walking into when he went into that appointment with me. I had no idea what I was walking into. Now I have a wonderful dentist, and he's a male, and it's perfectly great because I've done my work on it. But again, going back to why I'm here speaking to you today, if that first dentist had had havening, which didn't exist back then, but if he'd had that tool in his pocket and been able to help me regulate my autonomic nervous system by using havening and singing songs and doing the havening touch, he actually would have been teaching me how to and we would have been proactively depotentiating AMPA receptors, which are the receptors that have encoded the trauma in the amygdala. So activation then, a trauma response at that point is an opportunity. And that's not trauma reprocessing in that moment. It's regulating the system, but through choosing to use havening to regulate the patient's system, we're creating healing. We're helping it not become a disease state. Because what are the consequences of traumatization? It's a chronic alteration of the brain landscape. It changes fundamentally the way our brain is accessing and utilizing information. That's what I was showing you with the squiggly lines. And it makes us more vulnerable to further traumatization. So we know that in the pathological sense in our field, there's major depression and anxiety, there's PTSD, there's panic, there's so many different DSM experiences that show up. But medically, across the board, there's other experiences that happen too. I have a colleague of mine, Dr. Andrew Huberman. He's up at Stanford. He's a neuroscientist. And he stresses the fact that our system is a closed loop system. So anything that happens anywhere in the system impacts the entire system. Anything from a paper cut on the finger, if the immune system's too weak to heal that paper cut, can turn into an infection that can lead to brain swelling. I mean, it can be that simple. For me, I had a severe car accident. So my fiance died, immune system crashed, and then a woman ran a red light in an expedition going 65 miles per hour, hit me head on. I was in a severe car accident, which jostled my entire system. And I had tears in my blood-brain barrier. I had really severe brain and neck injury. And when I returned to work, that's when the mono outbreak happened. So I was exposed to mono. But because my system, my internal closed loop system inside had been so altered by the car accident and being widowed, the mono became encephalitis for me. So one thing builds on another and builds on another and creates a permissive landscape for the system to change, whether it's through psychology, like the experience of a mood disorder, or through inflammation, or through the development of TMJ or migraines, through the development of cardiovascular disease. I mean, we all know how insidious stress is. And so it's never just one thing that we're looking at in terms of stress or in terms of a adverse childhood event. In fact, we now know that people who have depression have almost always have 4 or more traumatic experiences. So what if depression isn't about serotonin per se? What if actually depression is about the traumatic experiences across that person's life that can be healed? And we see that in our work. And so if somebody comes in, they say, well, I struggle with depression. And if they're not in treatment, recommend them that they also work, or if they have chronic pain and they're coming in because they have TMJ or teeth grinding or migraines, recommend them to see a clinical practitioner who can work with the trauma reprocessing piece, because that will release so much of the stress that's generating and getting in the way of the work that you're trying to do. So ultimately, the more stressors we have, the further outside that window of tolerance I mentioned we get. And the further outside the window we are, the more permissive it is for our system to move further outside the window. The more vulnerable we are to future stressors, basically the more raw our brain is, and the more Amy's looking out for tigers. So as soon as Amy goes on alert she may be looking out for one tiger, but now she's on alert, and so she's looking for tigers everywhere. And, you know, we see that in the movies, right? They put on the right music and there's a flash of somebody going across the screen, and all of a sudden the actor or the actress is scanning the room, looking around. That's what happens to all of us. We're looking for the next predator, the next scary thing. And that can last for sometimes 12 to 30 hours. So you might as well have a bottle of wine, because that's how disrupted the system is with inflammations if you're pushed outside your window of tolerance. And getting back into that system or back into that window is hard if our brain is alive with activation. And I'm sure I know we've all experienced that. That is part of the human journey. So we want to help the system be regulated down into the window of tolerance. Because when we're out of it, it doesn't feel very good. Again, this isn't about pathology. This isn't about psychology. This is just about human beings and functioning. When we're in that fight or flight state, we're irrational, we're angry. And like Derek was saying, our thinking brain isn't there. We cannot logically get our patients or our client to connect back into what's reasonable in that moment, because their brain isn't available to do that. Or if they're hypo-aroused, they're stuck. They're easily distracted. You keep having the conversation with them about making sure they put their night guard in at night, and they keep not doing it because their brain just isn't connecting with, I need to do this thing to take care of myself. Or their brain, even worse, is going, it just doesn't really matter because I don't deserve to take care of myself anyway. I was watching Queer Eye for the Straight Guy. I don't know if any of you watch that show. They're doing the Kansas City edition right now, or a couple seasons ago. I don't know when it was, but had to watch it because that's my hometown. And they had a fellow on there who they actually works at a summer camp that I used to go to called Wildwood. And he didn't brush his teeth. He didn't shower. He didn't really do any self-care, but he lived for the kids that he worked with at the camp. And he had recovered from alcoholism, and in the process of his addiction, lost his son. And so they were going in because he's finally had access to his son again because he'd met the criteria. And his brain basically didn't have a neural pathway for, I deserve to take care of myself. He was shut down around it. And so they were doing work with him to help him see the value of simply brushing his teeth, and why his system was deserving of that, and why that was necessary. And that to me is an indication of being in this hypoarousal zone of simply going, it's not worth it and I don't deserve it. And so havening isn't just about when people are anxious or panicky, which that's my nervous system's go-to. I very rarely get hypoaroused unless my system collapses into fatigue. But that's a representation of how our system, and havening can also be used to create motivation and engagement. Both hyper and hypo are survival tactics, and they both significantly impact the way our brain and body are functioning. So what happens when we're pushed outside our window of tolerance? Well, we don't feel very good, as those last two slides showed. So our emotional functioning is drastically different than it is when we're in a homeostatic state, but our body functions differently. So we're in a hyper arousal state. Remember I mentioned that experience of the vision narrowing. Our vision is on that alert, vigilant looking out. And what that can feel like or look like is actually the vision starts to see fewer colors. It takes in light differently because of the way the eyeball's functioning, our optic nerves change. And so the world becomes very, very small. And then as that's happening and we're in that constant vigilant state, as Derek said, our body starts sourcing all these resources to stay in that vigilant state. And so it changes the way our heart is functioning because we're looking to be ready to get into action. It changes the way our body is digesting food. It inhibits digestion, which can lead to gastrointestinal considerations, which can lead to heartburn, which can lead to halitosis, bad breath, which can, I don't know, you tell me, impact teeth and oral health. All of these things come together. This is that closed loop system. So our amygdala is in relationship with all of these major organs through our vagus nerve. And havening helps that vagus nerve reacclimate itself. And so if you've ever studied the vagus nerve, or if you know anything about vagal therapy, they do a lot of breath work. And this is one of the main reasons why. And this is also that tongue-heart connection that Derek mentioned that starts at 4 weeks in the uterus, 4 weeks. The amygdala is not even on board until the 3rd trimester. So we're helping the system connect back to the original development of how it's supposed to be, returning to that homeostatic state by helping everything calm down and pulling that vagus nerve online. Because as you can see, when we're in hyper, every major organ system is impacted. And when we pull the system into the calming space, it relaxes. Or if it's hypo, it relaxes so much so that we go into freeze. So we want to be in that window of tolerance, and havening is a brain hack for doing that. Okay, so perhaps by now you're going, okay, Kate, we get it. But what is this thing and how do we do it? And so let's get into it. So the ultimate goal in your clinical practice and for putting this work into practice immediately is to modulate your nervous system so that you're in the window of tolerance. And havening is simple when we're using it for that effect. I'd like to do a demonstration. And I already leaned on Angie to help me out with this. Angie, are you around? Can you wave? Hello. Hello. Okay. So we're going to sing some songs. Now, the reason we sing songs is because of prosody and rhythm. So between the ages of 0 and 4, our right brain is largely running the show. Our left brain really not online until after the age of 4. And so you'll notice that mothers, and sometimes fathers, but largely always mothers, will sing to their children. They have it's called the motherly voice, and that's an actual scientific term for it. The reason for that is because the infant's cerebellum is playing a large role in modulating the nervous system and stimulating healthy growth. And so all of the childhood songs that we're used to have a specific prosody and rhythmicity that aligns with the cerebellum's natural desire to have balance and be soothed. Just like I mentioned, when my mom would pick me up and rock me as an infant who was in screaming pain, my system would calm down. So what we're going to do is we're going to sing 3 rounds of Itsy Bitsy Spider. I know this is going to seem a little silly. And Angie's going to designate, so we're going to have 3 groups. So this is just like going back to summer camp, if you're saying rounds at summer camp or back in kindergarten. And the first group is going to start with the Itsy Bitsy Spider went up the water spout. And when you hear spout, the second group's going to start. Itsy Bitsy Spider, and then all the way up to spout, and then the third group will start. Now, if you don't know this song, the rhythm's pretty simple and you can hum along. And what I recommend that you do is imagine everybody is singing to you. Allow the singing to just come into your mind and your body and just go with the rhythm of it. Because you don't even actually have to know the song. Our body is designed for rhythm and to connect with the human experience around us. While we're singing, we'll be applying the self-havening touch. And we're going to sing, like I said, 3 rounds. We have 3 groups, and each person will sing the song 3 times. And I want you to be looking around while you're singing. I want you to let your mirror neurons do their work. Now, before we begin, well, actually, Angie, can you designate the groups real quick?
Sure. Group 1 is the front row. Group 2 is the middle row, and group 3 is the back row.
And we're all doing it together. And Angie, I'll start with group 1. Can you start with group 2? And Derek, can you start with group 3? I don't know where you're sitting, but can you join group 3?
Victoria's back there with group 3.
Oh, Victoria's.
So we're good.
Perfect. So everybody has their guide. I'm group 1, Angie's group 2, Derek's group 3. And I will do a countdown before we begin for group one. But first, I would like to invite everybody to take a moment and notice something annoying that happened. So this is the opposite of our smile exercise that we did to start. So we're not looking for big money stuff here. Just, did you spill coffee this morning? I always spill coffee at trainings. For me, it's annoying to not be there in person with you guys. So I've already got mine. But seems to be working out really well. So I'm delighted about that. Might be, I don't know if you're, whatever it is. Perhaps there's a patient that's kind of pulling on you a little bit, or, whatever, something irksome. On that scale of 0 to 10, nothing above a 5, probably a 3 or below. So just take a moment and find something annoying. Okay. And if you don't have anything annoying, good on you. Your brain's just going to feel good. So that's awesome. You win. All right. So I'm going to count down and we're going to begin. So on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, group 1. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Is everybody singing with me? I can't hear you. Rain and wash the spider out. Okay, we're going to start again. I think I screwed it up. Okay, we're going to start group 1 again. I was like, I couldn't hear you guys. Okay, we're going to really sing out. This is like choir in the South. That's what we're doing. We're doing full body choir in the South Havening, okay? Okay, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. The itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Third round. Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the rain and washed the spider out. Out came the sun and dried up all the rain, and the itsy bitsy spider went up the spout again. Hey! I've never done that remotely. How'd it go? Now, check back in on whatever that annoying thing was. If you remember what it is, but just take a moment and check in. And did it shift or change? Anybody? Anybody? If anybody had a shift, would you be willing to share? Can we do a microphone? I'd just love to hear.
Okay. Anyone willing to share? Okay.
I was kind of annoyed at myself because I didn't get it that the session started at 8 instead of 9. And it was quite embarrassed walking in, and after this I could barely remember a minute ago what was I irritated about.
Wow. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. It's that simple. I mean, this is the brilliance of our mind and our body. And it's so mind-blowing to me. And you can see that's why I call it CPR for the amygdala. Because it's that little gift. And the piece that we just did there with everybody's coming together and singing is part of the healing process. And so if you're working with havening with your patient, bring yourself front and center as a representative. Like I mentioned before, I used to have really severe social anxiety. You would probably maybe never guess that. um, because doing this work has completely transformed the way my brain and my body interact with the world around me and with other humans. I've had multiple assaults. I grew up in a home with some pretty severe childhood trauma, and people were very scary for me. My amygdala learned very early that people were scary. And in fact, there's a primal part of our reptilian system called the periaqueductal gray that we now know will tell us that people are scary before the amygdala is even online if there's a sufficient amount of trauma in those first 0 to 4 years. And it's such a primal part of our brain that cockroaches have their version of it. When we look at the fMRIs of the periaqueductal gray, even in a calm state, somebody who's been diagnosed with any type of anxiety disorder, the periaqueductal gray or developmental trauma, so if they have a certain amount of ACEs, that little brain will go, all people are scary. Even if there's no activation technically noted in that moment. That's how powerful our primal reptilian brain is. And so how do we heal that except for to create new tribe? And that's what we're doing here. And that's really what Alpha is doing. That's what all of you there, which I wish I was there with you, all of you there are there to do, is to how do we create new tribe in the medical realm and of collaborative team relationships? How do we have the connections so we know that our patients are getting the full collaborative care to help their brain and body heal, so that closed loop system is able to go back to the resilient state that it was supposed to be in, even if that was taken from them before birth. And so using ourselves as a catalyst for the healing is such an incredible gift. The other piece is every single time you're havening, you're healing your own mind and your body. Because just like me applying the havening touch here, even in Los Angeles, half a country away, if you sat there and I just havened myself, your nervous system would start to go into a Deltawave state. Even though it's just this tiny little image of me up on that screen, your nervous system is still going to go, oh, I know about that, even though you didn't even know you knew about it until today. And so the more that we use ourselves, so let me finish that thought. So just like our system will do that, if our patient comes in a state of distress, our system will be pulled into a state of distress. That's empathy. Those are those mirror neurons. And so it's all the more reason for us to model proactively managing our nervous system. So what did we just do there? We found an experience that was annoying. Now, the reason I said annoying is usually our brain, if I say the word annoying, your brain will think of something annoying. So I consider that's what we call a routine emotion, which is we're supposed to have 35 to 50 routine emotions every single day. Most people don't know that. And a lot of our patients maybe have 2, right? I'm sad or I'm angry. So part of the work is to get them to have a lot more emotions. But the word annoyed is a routine emotion. It's just a basic emotion that's supposed to represent part of our ambient functioning. By tuning into that, the brain goes, oh, this thing, or we can have the felt sense of annoyance. So we're not sourcing up a trauma. We're just simply going, annoyed. I know what that feels like. And if our patient walks into the office and they're in a state of distress or they get triggered during a procedure, that's a state shift that's happening. And that's their ambient distress showing up. And so that's when we're looking to use havening proactively in your clinical space. Then we started to apply the self-havening touch. And you'll notice it's super effective doing it on yourself. And it's really empowering to do your own healing, to have that experience of I'm up at an 8 or a 9 and now I can't really remember what that thing was. Wow. When we can show our patients how much power they have over their brain, and that's why I call Amy with my patients, so that they can step out and go, wow, Amy's having a really hard time. I'm going to wrap a warm fuzzy blanket around her and let her know we're safe, because she doesn't understand that in this moment we're not actually in danger. So they can separate and pull back and help Amy heal. And that's what we're doing with that self-havening touch. And then we're giving the brain a different job. And through using songs intentionally, if songs are safe for our patients, then we're bringing on a natural soothing part of the nervous system that wants to trend towards being calm and feeling cared for. So we're giving the brain a different job. Rather than looking for tigers, we're saying, brain, you're going over here. Now, the distraction, we'll talk about different types of distractions that we can use. But we always want to make sure that the distractions we're using are safe and that they know them. So the reason I know now to ask about or to highlight, if you don't know the song, imagine people are singing to you and look around and take all that in, let that be the distraction. Is several months ago, I did a seminar and somebody didn't know the song Itsy Bitsy Spider. And I didn't know that, obviously, and I hadn't even thought about that. So it's always an opportunity to learn and grow. And she said, I started to get upset because I felt left out. And then I just invited my system to experience the song being for me. Like, now that is a resilient human being. Her brain found a way to be with tribe rather than feeling left out. So we want to use distractions that our patients can connect to. And so that's a really easy way to do, and I'll walk you through how to do that. The first thing we want to do is help them identify what is going on in their body that's causing the distress or the disturbance. So again, we're not bringing up a traumatic experience, and that's what separates this from trauma reprocessing. We're not helping them float back in their life and find the time when they had the sexual assault or the time when they almost drowned. We're not doing any of that with our patients. We're just noticing, or they're informing us that they're scared or nervous or that they feel a choking experience in their throat. I had one of my dear friends, the friend that was over on Thursday, had to have x-rays of her jaw. And she has a terrible gag reflex from some early childhood trauma of her own. And she said it was one of the worst experiences that she's had to date. Now, she just had a hysterectomy. She's 40 years old, literally a month ago. And the experience of having x-rays done in her mouth was more traumatic than having a hysterectomy at 40 years old. I know that those are your patients. Those are my patients. And she was sharing with me how tearful she was. And then she was sharing with me, because she does a lot of work with me. And she's my innovation strategist as well as one of my best friends. And she said, and then I remembered I had this thing, and I started thinking of you, and I asked the doctor if I could take a moment and leave the room and do some havening. And she did. And all she did was work with her own ambient distress in that moment so that they could get the x-rays. Now, is the trauma still there? Yes. Had it been activated in 30, 25 years? No. Was it probably more likely to be activated because of the surgical procedure she'd just gone through and the fact that this was just a couple days before the death of her dearest friend? Most likely. So we talk about the building of the vulnerability. So she was very vulnerable for this past trauma to be right there front and center getting those x-rays. But she was able to do the havening touch because she sat through my trainings and my seminars before, helping me design stuff, and calm herself down. So they got the x-rays. What an incredible gift. And so that's the power of this. And so what she did is she just checked in on her body, and then she identified this energy in her throat. And that was what was getting in the way, the gag reflex. And so she just attuned to that and then sang songs and did brain games. I love this body heat map because this really highlights that every feeling has an energetic state in our body. And so if our patients are struggling to connect, again, this kind of gives them a little bit of prefrontal cortex information of, well, what are you noticing? What are you feeling in your body right now? And they can check in and go, oh, I am feeling fearful, because their brain's just spiraling. And then they go, oh, part of me is feeling afraid. Amy's feeling afraid. Go, okay, so let's help Amy calm down. Or they might think it's fear, but really it's just surprise. I had a patient who was just informed that she has to have really crazy back surgery. And in the course of the consultation with the neurosurgeon, she went into a shocked state that she thought that she told me initially felt like fear, and then she was able to separate it out. Go, wait, no, I'm just feeling really surprised because I wasn't anticipating this. Amy's feeling surprised, and then she started doing this. And surprise versus fear are very different feelings, and just having the gradients of that emotion helped lessen the power of the emotion. So you can see even this attuning to the experience starts to shift and separate out the power of what's happening. Then we apply the havening touch. Self-havening is primary. Angie and Derek and Victoria all attended a longer one-day seminar that I did where we introduced facilitated havening, and we're not going to be bringing that in now, but just know that that's an opportunity if you want to do a one-day where you can learn about how to bring this even more into your work. But you can see with even the self-havening touch how powerful that is. And with all of our patients, as they're graduating out of treatment, we don't do facilitated havening anymore. Every single session is using self-havening because we want them to know that they can do their own work and that they can calm and soothe their own bodies. And then finally, we, again, give the brain a different job. We're taking that data that the amygdala is sourcing and saying, you know what, data, no, we don't need to pay attention to this tiger over here. Let's simply sing some songs. Let's do something else right now. And as you just witnessed, it's so, so, so powerful. The main thing that we really want to keep in mind with distractions is, like I was just saying, we want to use distractions that are safe for the patient. And it seems like this shouldn't be a big deal, but this is actually the most important part. Because the first, and I'll tell you why, because this will happen. There will come a time, not because of anything other than being human, where you will invite a distraction to a patient that's actually triggering to them. And to have that moment where their amygdala is already up and running, Amy's already looking for all the tigers, and it's like you accidentally just invited another tiger into the room. As a practitioner, it feels awful. Because you'll see it happen. Now, as a practitioner, just kind of to give yourself some grace there. Just go, okay, so a couple more AMPA receptors came online. Amy just got a little more activated, and so we're going to help those AMPA receptors do some depotentiating or healing too. So we're just getting a little more bang for our buck in that moment. But we want to avoid that as much as possible. So the best way to do that is, if you're teaching havening to a patient, is to make a list, and we'll be sending you a worksheet. So you'll have the worksheet that we give our patients and that you can use of their specific safe distractions. For some people, happy birthday is a joyous song. For others, happy birthday is highly triggering. And the difference between the two, and I had this happen, I had a patient that I worked with originally when she was 45. We did some great work. Happy birthday was fine. And then she came back in 5 years later. This was a couple months ago. And it was on the eve. She was coming in right before her 50th birthday. And happy birthday was no longer cool. She was coming into work on a car accident that she'd been in. But all of a sudden, that just brought up so much stuff. So do you need to reevaluate every single time? No. But just keeping in mind, even those little nuances are important. I won't really use happy birthday anymore, just because she taught me that maybe we just want to take that one off the table. So just because something's safe for us doesn't mean it's safe for them. And similarly, make sure you define your own safe inventory. So when you get the worksheet, print it out and do your own distractions, make your own list, so that your brain has something accessible and easy to connect to when it's in need. So what we're looking for are things that are actions, like walking upstairs, if that's comfortable, swimming in a pool, walking on a beach. You'll notice that these are things that have a rhythm. Again, we're looking for that cerebellum, right brain. Let's give that part of the system a different job, just in case there's any childhood trauma that might be coming up. We want to engage the healthy mechanism of the cerebellum and the right brain to help it calm down. And what we're going to also be doing is asking them to count each action. So walking up the stairs, notice and count out loud with each footstep. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I'd just like to invite everybody to take a moment and imagine you're bouncing a basketball. And now imagine and count in your mind as you imagine bouncing that basketball. If you've ever bounced a basketball, and especially if you've ever played basketball on a team, your brain probably went into a little bit of emotion of what that feels like to be bouncing the basketball, the rhythmicity of it. Your motor cortex just came on board and said, oh, I know what that is. And that's one of the things that we're really looking to get our patients to connect into, so that the brain isn't going down a felt sense of knowing what the activation feels like. I was talking about the muscle memory of teeth grinding, or TMJ, of jaw clenching. You can see how we're kind of taking their system and whacking it out of that. We're saying, premotor cortex, you're doing something else now. When I was 16, I've had so many things, but when my jaw locked, I could only open my mouth about that much. And it was excruciating how tight it was. And so they put Botox in my jaw, and I got all the night guards and all this stuff. And later, as I was aging, I mean, somehow luckily mine didn't get locked like that forever. It was after one of my sexual assaults that my system anchored into that. But I later, when I was at a dentist, noticed that energy coming up, and I don't know, it was something they were working on. And I just started doing this in the dental chair. And since then, I haven't ever had that energy sense, because I proactively in that moment targeted the somatic experience of that tension arising, the anticipation. And that was just something I discovered. But that's really where this is such an exciting opportunity for you guys with your patients in real time. If they notice their jaws tightening, or if they're getting anxious, you're shifting the way the brain is utilizing that activating energy through moving into the havening touch. Now, of course, you want to lean back. I did ask my dentist to gently sit back. He's fabulous. He's in our same building, so he knows what we do, and he knows that we do weird things. Half my team goes to him. So he's very accepting of when we say, I'm going to do this weird thing for just a minute. But that's the gift of this, and that's the gift that you start to teach your patients, is how to be super proactive in doing their own healing work whenever they notice any energy coming up. And at the end of this, we'll go through a schedule of how every data point of activation is now an opportunity to let Amy go. She doesn't need to carry that anymore. Anyway, I jumped a little ahead of myself, so I want to come back to our distractions here. But that's why we're looking for counting and the rhythmicity. The nursery rhymes we already talked about. Counting forwards and backwards. So if you have somebody who simply says, nope, songs are not good for me, don't fret. They don't have to do songs. What we were looking to do is find different categories that work for people. Counting, so if their right brain is so hijacked, then the counting of numbers in the category games gets them straight up into their prefrontal cortex and their thinking brain. That's good news. And so I have certain patients who have so much childhood trauma that their periaqueductal gray thinks all people are terrifying. And even me being in presence with them, for me to do, again, that facilitated havening touch, I have to be quite close. We usually do several sessions of self-havening with me at a distance. And so if you have patients where they need oral surgery, they need to have dental care, or they need to, whatever it is, you have to be close to them to administer the treatment. But your proximity freaks that periaqueductal gray out. We call her Perry. So we have Amy and Perry. And the two of them are just gossiping like crazy back there. Then know that you actually now have a tool where you can start far away from them, teach them self-havening, you model self-havening, and start singing songs, do your safe distractions with them until their system is safe enough for you to come close because it's in a permissive space. And then you can do your work. And anytime the activation, if that starts to show back up, then you do that same thing. You start back out. And once again, you start doing self-havening, and you're just normalizing for them that this is a part of their journey. There's nothing bad about it. And you both know that you have a tool that will help them be where they need to be in that moment, which is to get the treatment that they're there for. And in order to do that, helping Amy calm down. And there's nothing wrong that Amy is getting scared, because their journey had something scary in it. And she's just thinking that you're periodically a tiger while you're trying to do your work. And that is huge, to hold that space for them. And then just to be a part of the work with them by doing the havening and guiding them through the distractions in the brain game. So in that space, sometimes we just need to go into, we're just going to count by numbers. But again, make sure they don't have math anxiety. We don't want Amy to have additional anxiety. Or playing alphabet games. And what that looks like is 5 living things that start with the letter A. So anaconda, ant, anteater, antelope, artichoke tree. I think artichokes grows on trees. I don't know. Apple tree. And then moving to 5 things for B. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, and you'll notice this, we're going to do another practice in just a second, is that the brain will start to slow down. And so as the brain is slowing down, you want to be normalizing that for them. And that's why our participation is key. So I'll have patients who, we get to the letter B for 5 living things, and they're like, bear, Britney Spears, and then their brain goes, I don't know. And if they have a neural network for stupid, that's going to get activated. And so that's, unless we let them know their brain's going to slow down ahead of time, and when their brain starts to have a hard time sourcing up information, we simply go, that's what we're looking for. Your brain's getting fuzzy, because that's the warm, fuzzy blanket. And then we start to help them. What's a super big pig? Like, oh, a boar. Yeah, a boar. Okay, what has wings and a weird looking nose? And they might go bat, or a bird. And so then we start playing the games with them to help them identify their distractions. And through doing that, we're again creating safe tribe. And that's one of the key goals here, is letting them know that they're with a safe other, because left amygdala wants safe other. They want tribe. That's Billy Madison with the little boy. Hey, buddy, you're the coolest. What'd you say? I'm Miles Davis. If wetting your pants is the coolest, I'm Miles Davis. That's what we want to be generating, is creating that space. And we're the catalyst for it. We're the safe other in that moment. And we're in that space automatically because we're in the authority expert role as the doctor or the provider. And so here we are aligning with that, and that will help their system calm down and feel safer, even if we're asking them to do something that they might think is a little silly. So we're just teaching them how to help their body feel better. So I want to help you have the experience of what it feels like when your brain slows down, and to practice helping each other come up with these little gentle prompts that are a lot of fun. Okay, so you're going to work with the people who are at your table. So each table is a group, and you're going to go around the table, and Angie and Victoria and Derek are going to be floating a little bit in case people have questions. So they're my eyes on the ground, and then I'll also need one of you to let me know when everybody's kind of wrapped up. But I'm going to give everybody a couple minutes here to do this. And within your group, you're going to be applying the havening touch. And so Derek, Angie, and Victoria, if you notice anybody's kind of slacking off on havening, that might be because they're a little shy about doing it. But again, doing it, even just getting through the kind of the nervousness about applying the touch, is a huge part of this. My team now, it's so funny, we're in our team meetings, and somebody will just start havening, and we'll know, like, oh, something just came up for them. Cool. Because they're just doing their own self-care, and we all walk around the clinic all day long havening now, whether it's distressing or neuroplastic work that we're doing, it doesn't matter. It's just it's just what we do. And my hope is that someday this will just be what all humans are doing to calm themselves down and to help their system stabilize. So this is your opportunity to practice in a tribe of your people, just in case any social anxiety pops up. Okay, so you might get a prompt if they notice that you're slowing down on doing your self-havening in this exercise. And if you already know what your sweet spot is, then just focus on your sweet spot. So if it's arms or hands or face, feel free to just focus on that. So the brain game we're going to play is I'm going to give you a word in just a minute, and it'll be up here on the screen. And whoever is the start, so usually what I do is the person who is closest to the back of the room is going to start the exercise. I'm going to designate that for you, because usually there's a, you go first, do you want to go? And everybody gets really polite, and then we lose time. So I'm going to let you know whoever at the back of the room is going to start. And you'll, if the word was empower, you'll be taking the first letter of that word and finding a place in the world that starts with that letter. So here it's England. And then the second person is going to take the second letter of your word. Sorry, super cute squirrel just ran by. Oh, two did. Squirrels. Okay, so there's my brain damage, ADHD. I'm totally squirrel out all the time. Second letter of that word. And you're going to find another place in the world for that letter. And then so on and so forth. So E, England, and then we have N to Norway, O to Orlando, and R to Rome. All the way through the end of the word. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so each person is a new place in the world. Cities, states, restaurants, streets, it doesn't matter. And if you notice that somebody's brain is slowing down, then make it into a game, and that's where we start to add in these prompts. So if the second letter is an F, I might go, where do a lot of our oranges come from? Or if I wanted to go to Disney World, I might go to Florida. So we're just giving gentle prompts again to get that thinking brain online. Okay, so your word is heal. And you're going to work with your table. And so you're going to go through H-E-L. And you're going to go, each person is going to, in their turn, spell each letter. So you're going through H, one round, E, second round, A, third round, L, fourth round. Okie dokie? Got it. Okay, so go ahead and get rolling, and I'm going to observe.
Hey, I have a few seconds till they're done. Okay, how much longer do you want them to go?
Great. How are we doing, guys?
We're doing good. I think those tables are done. What would you like us to do now?
Okay. Everybody's all wrapped up. Perfect. Then we're. So Angie, quick question for you. I know it's been a long morning and we haven't had a formal potty break.
So true. So
Would people like to take a quick break to 9:30? It's 9:30 here, but what time is it there? 11:30, and then we can finish up the last 30 minutes.
that's good.
Is that okay?
Quick break.
Okay. So we're gonna start again in 8 minutes. Everybody, a quick breather, and I'm gonna take a quick breather myself. I'll be right back.
You know, I just wasn't, I couldn't find it in my Rolodex. Yeah. Hey, Amanda, when are we supposed to end the day? Try to make it early.
We already went from Phoenix up there. You're just a couple hours.
How much time do we have, Kate?
Yep. Okay, ready to rock and roll?
We'll give them a 2-minute warning.
Okay, 2-minute warning.
Two-minute warning. Okay, while everyone finds their seats, I want to remind everyone also that if you have questions for the panel discussion this afternoon, the different presenters, the different topics that we talked about, there's a basket over here on this table. Write it down, put it in there. So I'm sure a lot of people have similar questions. That way we can get it to the people who are going to be answering the questions so they can be prepared for it and we get the best possible answer. Okay, 1 minute. They can hear you now. So we're going to start thanking people for who are in their seats. Dr. Raj, good job. Great job, you rock. Kathy Murdoch, once again, rocking it. Good job. I can call on her too, but unless every time. Dave Shirazi, good job. Owen Mendez, got it going on. Amparo, good. Okay, so we're going to get started.
All right, so we're back. So let's talk about pain. For all of us, pain is one of the primary reasons patients ultimately finally choose to show up, unfortunately. A lot of people are satisfied with kind of good enough living until pain occurs. And when that pain happens that they'll actually pick up the phone and make a phone call. And the pain could be, in our world, anxiety or depression. In your world, it could be a toothache or, migraines or whatever it is. So it's a really important part of the treatment that we all do. And we also have already talked a lot about how incredibly impactful stress is, and pain and stress go hand in hand. Our body starts to develop a neural memory for pain networks. And that's what leads us to living in these states where, I don't know if you can see what I'm doing, but our shoulders are up and our muscles are tense, or like I showed you with the slide with the hyperarousal or hypoarousal, those become neural pathways that our brain anticipates or starts to live within, especially when we're in that looking out for tiger state on a regular basis. And pain puts us more and more in that looking out for tigers state. So havening is a really powerful opportunity for disrupting the pain sequence. And like I was just talking about with my own jaw pain and the TMJ that I used to get, we can shift the neural memory of that through incorporating the havening touch into our treatment process. So a little known fact about the amygdala is she actually has a specific nucleus that is pain oriented. Now, that seems obvious, right? She's all based on survival. And one of the main reasons we know something is wrong is because there's pain. But this little nucleus has memory centers that encode the physiological experience of pain and hold on to them and then reactivate them when they're triggered. What that means is in the moment of that hyper gamma wave we talked about, that super fast brain wave, when Amy goes, I have to remember this forever. If there's any physiological engagement, and usually there is, then she's going to remember that. And it could be anything from the pain of breaking your back. It could be the tightness in the chest. And so these are frequently body memories that people carry around with them. And clinically, for our practice, we have a lot of physicians who send us the patients who are in pain and they don't know why. CAT scans clean, PET scans clean, SPECT scans clean, MRIs clean, blood's clean, everything's clean, and yet this person still is having severe chronic pain. That's when we know it's psychogenic. I don't like to put that psychogenic term on it. What I call it, I go, that's okay. So you have amygdala pain. Your amygdala now is holding on to this experience. And oftentimes these are patients who have a lot of medical trauma. These are patients who've been through multiple procedures and their body is encoding the experience of having treatment after treatment after treatment, and is also now anticipating treatments and having a reactive fear response. So the easiest way to think about this is to think about a panic attack. I had a patient who had his first panic attack ever. And in my old office, I had a set of 30 stairs, a beautiful 100-year-old building, definitely not ADA compliant, my new offices. And to get up to my office, you had to walk up these 30 stairs. And he got a little short of breath walking up the steps and had a panic attack. And he walked into my office in the panic attack, which for me as a Havener is awesome because I go, well, Amy's on board, let's go. I get excited about that because it makes the work a lot easier because all the data is right there. But for him, he was so flummoxed as to why walking up steps would trigger a panic attack. And I said, well, what happened? And he told me, well, I started to get short of breath and my brain went, I can't breathe. And then it went into, I'm going to die. And that shortness of breath was that central nucleus, that little physiologically oriented nucleus in the amygdala, making an interpretation and an anticipation around the shortness of breath. So that's what frequently happens when our patients start to have anxiety or have a physiological presence of a somatic experience. It's because this little nucleus is showing up. Just giving you this data empowers you to help normalize it for your patients. And simply say, you know, Amy has a memory center for what happens to her bodies. And as soon as you say that, again, you're saying it's not you, it's your brain. And that's one of the most important messages I hope that you carry out of what I'm sharing with you this morning. The more we can help them know that what's happening is their brain, the better they feel. But that little nucleus starts to build neural pathways that lead to the TMJ. That becomes the habit of the teeth grinding or the TMJ or the having the shoulders up or the stress anxiety response to the rapid heart rate. And so when those things show up in your clinical space, again, going to, oh, I have a tool for this is really, really helpful. So just knowing that they're sharing this piece of data, I go, oh wait, havening could probably help here. So that they feel calmer in your chair rather than maybe they bully through it and they get the procedure done. But the next time they come in, they're now not only nervous about the treatment, but they're nervous about their physiological experience before the treatment even starts. That's that generalization that happens. And I don't know if any of that's ringing a bell for you guys, but I know that I see that with my patients the first, if they've been in treatment before, specifically if they've done EMDR before, because they've perhaps had an experience of trauma reprocessing that's been really raw and not addressed appropriately. And so when they come into my office, they're nervous until I teach them havening. And all of a sudden they start to look forward to coming to do the work with me because they know that their brain and their body is going to get a serotonin GABA bath. Their brain gets a massage. They get that warm fuzzy blanket in my office, and then they want to do even the hardest of the work. And so the more that we can teach people how to do this work and put their system automatically into this state, their frameworks around medical care is going to shift drastically, because they know that the medical care isn't going to be triggering them or activating them. But once one person's had one medically traumatic experience, and medically it could be dentistry, it could be surgery, it could be anything. White coat syndrome in a nutshell. Their system is anticipating trauma more and more and more. And I know we all see that. And so we're teaching their system that actually, no, you're here for treatment because that's what you're here for. And by the way, we're going to help it feel good and be safe. Even if it's hard treatment, even if it's uncomfortable treatment. And trust me, I work with adult survivors of severe sexual childhood trauma. We go into very, very uncomfortable places by design in every session. And yet they come into my office looking forward to doing the work, and they leave my office feeling good, which is unheard of. And I see that with all of my team members and all of the clinicians that I train, because their system has been wrapped in that warm, fuzzy blanket. So keeping this little nucleus in mind, and anytime you start to notice a shift into a physiological, or a patient shares with you that they have a fear of pain, introduce that patient to havening. Welcome that into your work. Change their body's physiological experience of it. And just because they don't know why, they might not know why. I used to be very fearful of going to doctors because as a child, I was always at the doctor and they never knew it was wrong. And by the time my little left brain at 4 years old came online and started understanding that the doctors really didn't know, then going to the doctor was pretty futile. But going in and knowing that I can put my brain and body into a warm bath of warm, fuzzy serotonin and GABA goodness, I'm like, okay, maybe sometimes things come up and my doctor still doesn't know. And I go, well, okay, now it's just data. There's no activation of old fear. And that's pretty cool. And I see that with my patients too. So how do we target this? Because again, we're not doing trauma reprocessing. We're just noticing what's showing up in that moment and utilizing that as an opportunity for healing. We're empowering them to take distress and turn it into a win. That's that Calvin and Hobbes comic strip. You're gonna fall down, let's make it a ta-da moment. So you're feeling nervous, you're feeling choked up like my girlfriend described with the gag reflex and the x-rays. That's an opportunity. Let's use this. And so doing something what I call symbolic havening for these somatic experiences is really, really powerful. You're simply giving them the space to notice the physiological presentation of whatever it is and saying, if that was a symbol that you could hold in your hands, or if that was an item that you could hold or put in front of you or put on the floor here, maybe it's really big, what would it look like or what would it feel like? And so notice that even in that prompt, we're getting the patient to step out of what feels like the all-encompassing experience in that moment. Well, all I can focus on is the gagging. Okay, so let's take that gagging energy and we're going to set it here on the counter. And let's just notice it, that a part of you is feeling that way. And then we're going to give that a construct, basically. How would you describe it? So fatigue often feels like a steel blanket. Pain, it's like, so they have pain in their shoulder. Oh, it's a starburst. TMJ, I was thinking about it last night. It always felt like there was a rock in my jaw that I couldn't get out. So we take that rock and set it aside, and then they can notice the rock, and then you do your distractions on that. So you're just helping them get some objective space from it. And it gives the brain the opportunity to say, I am not all of this. This is a part of me. So I often ask my patients if they say, my pain's at a 10. It's everywhere. Then I'll say, okay, I'd just like to invite you to check in with your pinky. And they usually give me a funny look. And then they'll look at their pinky and I'll say, is your pinky in pain? Now, if their pinky's actually in pain because that's where they have a cut or something, don't do that. Use their thumb or something else. But usually they'll go, no, my pinky's just fine. And their brain will just go, oh, it's not all of me. And that gets the beginning parts of that prefrontal cortex online. And then I go, okay, so then notice if where the pain is, what would that look like? Well, it just feels like a knife. Okay, so let's just imagine we're taking that knife and we're going to set it over here. Or we're just going to set that knife over there and then we're going to do distractions. And then we check back in on the knife after we do several rounds of distractions, and sometimes it's not even there anymore. Because their brain separated it and set it aside, and we've given that warm fuzzy blanket to Amy. So ultimately, our goal is to build an empowered brain for resiliency. And I really love what Derek was saying about helping the patients get back on the journey that they were meant to be on before the hard things happened. And so these are all hacks for the amygdala specifically. So the havening, the scientific term is the amygdala depotentiation technique. And these are hacks that get Amy back into her humming along, looking out for real tiger space, rather than trying to find scary tigers in every moment. And within that, the more that we do our own work, I'm sure you've been catching this message throughout this morning, the more we do our own work, and the more we teach our patients to do their own work, the more accessible the state of resiliency is, the more we're in our window of tolerance. And so we teach all of our patients, and honestly, not just all of our patients, like I'm teaching this to you, I teach this to anybody who will listen. I try not to be annoying about it, but I know that humanity is better when we're all in our window of tolerance. And so the more people that are willing and interested in learning about this, the more I introduce this to. And so I do encourage you to take some of this baseline stuff, even these group exercises that we've done, and teach them to whatever community or social groups you're a part of. Because just noticing and working with the ambient distress is actually depotentiating past stressors and traumas that the brain is encoding or healing. And intentionally putting our brain into a state of resiliency creates the neural network to being in that state. I mean, so many of us live as a rule outside the homeostatic state that we're supposed to be in as a species. And we're building a new memory network, a new felt sense of being in the zone of tolerance. So to that end, we have all of our patients start a havening self-care routine in their day-to-day life. And my team and I do this as well. And it's so interesting. You know, my husband's from India, and so when we travel back to India, we usually go for several weeks at a time. And so I won't necessarily be as proactive with my havening as I usually am, because we're traveling and, you know, doing the India stuff. And usually about 6 or 7 days in, he'll tap me on the shoulder and be like, "Hey, babe, I think it's time you get back to your routine." And I'll be like, and I'll just kind of check and be like, "Yeah, you might be right." Because the system will just start to kind of, my natural system, like I've shared with you a lot of my story, my natural baseline is I have a lot of glucocorticoid receptors, which means that my system gravitates towards stress. I gravitate naturally in my kind of homeostatic state towards being outside my window. And all I have to do is spend 5-7 minutes a day doing havening, and my system stays right in it and it hums along beautifully. That's how powerful it is. And the other magical piece of this, just like when I asked you to imagine bouncing the basketball, the more we do our own self-havening, the stronger our neural network and the muscle memory for havening is. So we can actually train our brain to be in a state where we think about havening, and then our brain will start putting us into that Deltawave state. Now that is a superpower, because you don't have to be doing this or this or this. You just start thinking about havening and your brain and body will go, "Oh my gosh, Delta feels so good." That's a superpower. I work with, I'm a horseback rider, and I do a lot of training with Grand Prix and Olympic horseback riders. And that's one of the things that I stress for them is you need to be able to, in the middle of a ride, think Delta and have your brain go Delta. And I think that's true for all of us. Being in that flow state is awesome. And to be able to put our system in flow just because we think about it, being able to give our system a dose of GABA or serotonin is such an awesome experience, especially in a moment where perhaps somebody else is in a moment of reactivity and it may not be appropriate to start doing this. Because I know if my husband's in a moment of reactivity and I start doing this, he's going to think that I'm, perhaps not really paying attention to him, which may be what he's really needing in that moment. But instead I can think delta and calm down and then actually be really present for him. So the brain hack here opportunities are awesome. So doing and designing your own havening program is a really, really important opportunity for your own healing and resiliency development. And so again, like I mentioned, you'll get a worksheet from me or from Angie and Jamie that will have the distraction techniques written out. And then on the back of that worksheet is the havening treatment schedule, the at-home practice schedule that we give our patients. And so I highly recommend doing that for yourself. What does it look like? It means when you first wake up, first sit up and put your feet on the floor before you start havening, because havening waves are sleepy waves and otherwise you might fall back asleep. So you want to sit up first and then check in and see how you're feeling. Another little known piece of data is that because these little receptors in our amygdala aren't impacted by the human growth hormone when we're sleeping, they're not reprocessed. It also means that they are awake and functioning while we're dreaming. They never go to sleep. And so waking up on the wrong side of the bed is a very real thing. This is why we have bad dreams and nightmares. We can be having a beautiful dream about walking on a beach, and then something pings that matrix of 18 variables, and Amy comes online and goes, well, now there's a tsunami, didn't you know? And we're having a nightmare. So what we're doing is helping our brain get back into the window of tolerance if anything in our sleeping experience has knocked us out of it. So especially for patients who have leg cramps, night cramps, restless leg syndrome, insomnia, teeth grinding, bruxism, TMJ, any of those things, teaching them to start doing havening first thing in the morning will heal and release any of those little receptors that came on board during the night. And I hope your brain's clicking with the opportunities here. Because if that central nucleus was woke up in the middle of the night and they're grinding away, it's still going to likely be lit up when they wake up in the morning, and they can start, without even knowing they're doing it, depotentiating the muscle memory and the neural networks tied into that. So you wake up, you check in and use the pain scale, or in my field, we call the subjective units of distress scale, 0 to 10, 10 being the most pain or activation you've ever been in, 0 being completely zen. Rank yourself, and if you're above a 2, do distractions. Play brain games while applying the havening touch first thing in the morning. Once you feel yourself getting into that haven state and calming down, then you're going to move into changing your perceptual framework and choosing the network that you want active throughout the course of the day. How do you want your brain to feel? That's the creating possibilities technique. Now, you noticed in the meditation we did, I had you guys start asking questions. What if I was? And perhaps as you did that, your brain started thinking about the benefits of being curious. Because our brain loves questions, and that's what creating possibilities is. We're simply going to start to ask questions of ourselves. What if I was calm? What if I was excited? What if I was present? And anchoring that into our mind and our body so that throughout the rest of the day, those little receptors are lit up. And as you go on throughout your day, you can ask that same question. Perhaps you start feeling fatigued or tired. I invite you to practice this today. Whatever your chosen state was with that meditation, if in the afternoon you start feeling a little tired or worn out, go back to that. What if I was? And notice if your state shifts. Because you've already started to lay down that neural network. And this is a core part of neuroplasticity. In the evening, then, we review the day. And any energy that's lingering that's less than preferable, this is the find the things that are annoying exercise that we did before we sang Itsy Bitsy Spider. We're going to just review the day and notice those things and then start havening again. Singing your songs. It's so simple and beautiful. And again, you'll have this in your worksheet in the email you get. So I'm not just going to leave this to you guys thinking you're going to be writing it all down right now. You'll get copies of all of this. So the framework here is you're looking for the opportunities to heal. Every moment of activation, so anxiety, stress, annoyance, frustration, from here on out, those are all opportunities. Because something got pinged and it's an important data point and you want to listen to that data point and then you get to let it go. And it completely shifts your relationship with these emotions. Because Amy stops playing such a huge role in the information processing experience if there's anything tied to her for the feelings of frustration or whatever that's pinging in that moment. And then another little lovely hack here is peaceful havening. And that's simply helping the system connect with rhythmicity into feelings of being calm and grounded. And so what we use, and so if you teach this again to a patient, you want to make sure that the ocean is safe for them. If it's not safe, then you wouldn't want to do this one. But it's noticing as every wave rolls towards them, it's bringing them a sense of peace. And as it's rolling out, it's leaving them with a sense of calm. The main thing that is important here, which seems like a kind of silly data point, is do set an alarm on your phone. Because our little timekeeper, if she doesn't know that somebody's managing time for us, our brain timekeeper is going to start to say, am I doing it long enough? So this just offloads that task so that you know an alarm will go off once you've done it enough for your system to really sink into the experience. The more we can offload tasks, the better, the more present we can be. Such as wave rolling in, peaceful, or what if I was peaceful? What if I was calm, and then moving into peaceful and calm, imagining those waves bringing you peace and leaving you with a sense of calm as they return to the ocean. So this is the 3-item distraction technique. Again, you'll get this copy. And this is what we've been practicing. So this is the actual write-up for it. But again, it's just as simple as what we've been doing. You're just singing songs. You're playing brain games while applying the havening touch. And then the other piece here is the creating possibilities. And it's just looking at what experience do you want to carry with you? And then noticing if you felt that before. And our brain is so simple in this way. So say you want to feel strong, but you don't immediately have a sense of strength accessible. So I had a young man I was working with whose wife was in the hospital. And he didn't have a sense of psychological or emotional strength right now. He was completely depleted and exhausted and scared. And so I knew that he's a big gym guy. And so I said, I just want you to imagine that you're doing arm curls. And we're going to do a distraction of 10 arm curls with each arm. And then we're going to do squats. And then I had him check in and ask that same question, what if I was strong? And because he'd activated the muscle memory of strength from being at the gym, he could now harness strength into being emotionally strong. So he could use his physiological strength to hack an emotional strength. So just just think about in your own life ways, or patients share things they enjoy with you, how to hack that. A horseback rider who had a really, really awful fall. And so we're working on the fear of getting back on her horse. And we were using the cadence of her horse's canter. And as she's moving through the cadence, she starts to smile. And I said, if that smile had a symbol, what would it be? And she's like, it's a silver song. Her horse has the most beautiful silver mane and tail. And so the silver song overrode Amy's fear of being on the horse and jumping again. So we're just redirecting into a positive experience. And they're going, what if I had the silver song? And now when she gets on her horse, she starts with that question, what if I had the silver song? And her brain immediately goes, that's awesome. The silver song is great. And she has more muscle memory with that than the fear. So it overrides Amy. Does that make sense? I hope this is kind of, you can see how we can be fluid in hacking our brain this way. And that once we get the question going, if it feels like a good fit, you can move into I deserve to be, or I can be, or I will be. Finally into I am. I am strong. So I know it took us right up to the final time here. So I don't know if we have a couple minutes for questions, or if people have questions they would specifically like to ask. I'm going to lean on Angie and Derek to, you guys let me know.
Okay, we have one submitted so far, and this is regarding our neural networks around hazing. What role does toxic dental materials seem to play?
That's, sorry, toxic what?
Dental materials.
Well, can you define what toxic dental material means to you or whoever asked the question?
Who asked the question?
Fluorides, and mercury.
So the environmental fluoride, mercury, the things that are hazardous.
Derek, I think that's actually a question for you.
I know it was for me, but I'm going to tell you something about Kate. This is it. So think about through this period of time that she's been talking. Raise your hand if she had an answer for something that was going through your mind within a few minutes of the time that it went through your mind. Yes. Yeah. Can you explain that one, Kate?
No.
But this is what happens because you do that, and we find the same thing as we're working to quiet our minds for osteopathy, and some of that is by replacing things with a sense of love and curiosity. But a lot of what we do in preparing to be able to check in with someone osteopathically is a lot of what you're doing, and we share those experiences. What I saw you do with people here, because I could watch it. You can watch, oh, that one, there's one that had a question, and you just happened to answer it, and whether you felt like you went off subject for just a moment or not, but answered the question. And I think we underestimate that level of this sort of family connection that we get together when we're doing this. And I just wanted to bring that part up. And say thank you. I think it's amazing. And the toxic dental materials, this is the interesting thing because there's how many of you know who Mercola is? Mercola.com? Okay. How many of you know what happened when he had his mercury fillings removed? Anyone know the story? Okay, so he had his mercury fillings removed, he went into shock, and his best answer for himself was to have them put back in. And we go like, we're ready to bark, when we hear that. Yeah. But he was so uncomfortable. And so what we're seeing is this empowering that we have. And those of you that learned the Orlace also, but this empowering, because it is a transformation, the process of moving through and becoming more independent of those things and not subject to those things. That's a process. That's the process of stating some of your own boundaries. That is a process. And so I think it has a lot to do with this interactive part, because we're either going to be fear-based or we have confidence and that be empowered. And that's what I get really excited about, and especially when we're dealing with such a vulnerable part of the body, one of the more vulnerable parts, to work on that sense of empowering, like she's talking about, because these things are all around us. What's one of the most prevalent minerals on the earth is aluminum. And what typically tags along with aluminum is fluoride. And so we're subjected to this, but we have a capacity, which what we learned through the laws of hormesis, we have the capacity to actually create boundaries and not be affected by it a lot more than we think. So in our society, we allow ourselves to be sort of parasitized in a way, and those could be experiences that we have, or they could be actual things, entities in some way, whether it's bacteria or not. But so that's what I think is very exciting, is the potential to now be state your boundaries, put that in every day. What is the choice I'm going to make about it? It's not a matter of pretending. She said that at the very beginning, and the same thing about cognitive behavior therapy. That in love, we can't change ourselves just by mantling it. It doesn't. But we still have this is a way to empower ourselves to be able to choose how we're going to respond. I don't know if that answers the question or not, but having done this from, well, as like I said, I was mercury free in 1980, and which put me at a big risk of being called into the board on a regular basis. You go through a lot of thoughts, and you see patients, and you inherit them that are in different stages of this. And what I found was the most important thing was the empowerment, because they're still subject to it. The ones that had these things removed out of fear, they're still the ones that if you were to do the test, they still show present on a quicker test.
And I can add two pieces to that. One, the case study you were just sharing, Mercado, the system gets so used to having a false entity there to rely on. And we have, and that's the same with addiction and medication. Our system will downregulate and upregulate with whatever we're putting into it, especially if it's exogenous. That's that closed loop system. We're bringing something from an external system into our closed loop system, and our system's going to have to adjust, and it will, because it wants to survive, whether that's for our betterment or not. And so when we take those things out, we're disrupting and changing that closed loop system again to have to move towards a new balance, a new homeostatic state. Sometimes the state that it was supposed to originally be meant to be in. And that's, same as the kind of reaction to not having the mercury there. That's the same thing that we see when patients stop being hypervigilant. Their entire system goes, but I'm supposed to be hypervigilant. Being calm is very scary.
Very scary to be calm.
And so utilizing these tools, because, havening is called havening because the Deltawave, the serotonin, the GABA, the human growth hormone, is the electrochemical representation of safety in the brain and the body. That's why it's called havening. And what we're doing is starting to create a new normal of that being safe for the mind and the body, regardless of whatever it is that we're shifting, whatever new experience we're inviting into the closed loop system, or whatever old experience we're taking out because it no longer works for the patient or their body.
And that's that whole thing of you displace darkness with light. So you invite the light in, and that's what displaces the darkness.
Yes.
Often we're in a position of taking out and not inviting in something better.
Yeah. And the other piece you just said, Derek, about making that monumental professional choice back in the 80s is, in many respects, I did that same choice in 2014 when I chose to bring havening into my clinical practice. Nobody knew about it west of New York, and I came back to LA and started doing havening. And I remember I was at a meet and greet with a group of psychologists that I've never met before, and LA is largely psychoanalytic. So everything you think about psychoanalysis in that community is probably true. They're very much into their 10-year program for treatment 5-6 times a week because there's huge job security in that. And I'm in this group of clinicians, and I walk in, and this gentleman comes up and greets me, and I'm just a light with havening and just came off a great session. And so I go, "Oh, can I show you?" And I touch his shoulder. And I start basically petting him because he doesn't know what I'm actually doing. And he's just sweet and he's talking to me, but I can tell he's kind of like, this is strange. And then this beautiful woman walks over and puts her arm around him. And in my field, touch is a no-go at all. That's what we've been indoctrinated into. And so it's really been transformational to change and bring touch into the practice. But this young woman looks at me and introduces herself. She goes, "Hi, I'm Alex. This is my husband, Daniel." And I had a really important moment of stimulus value for myself, and also really clearly how different it's going to be bringing this forward into the space of mental health. So I know there were some concerns that Angie wanted me to address, and I hope I really put some clear structure around how to bring havening into your clinical practice, given that, yes, you are largely a touch-based modality already. You do touch your patients, but this is a very different type of touch. And how using self-havening automatically puts that boundary into place for you and further empowers the patient to do their own care, because they can go home and keep doing it and not feel dependent on you to get that relief. And that's my number one goal. That's my team's goal, is we want to be out of business. Humanity is better if we're out of business, because that means people are in their window and they know how to do their own work. And so bringing the self-havening in is so empowering, and it protects all of the different boundaries of your clinical care and how you proactively use havening in that space. Is there another question, Angie?
Yes, we have a question about the havening touches on the face, because as you know, we're a dental group and we love our anatomy. So one of the key facts of human development is the buccinators, which are muscles in the cheeks, if you can see me right here. They're the first oropharyngeal muscle we can control. So the question is specifically with the Deltawave of the cheeks being at a 90% delta feedback, where is that? Is it under the zygomatic process or the buccinators? So if you can repeat that for all of us so you can very clearly demonstrate where the havening touches.
What it is? Yeah. So you just want me to show you exactly where it is?
Yes.
Okay, so it's basically tracking where the apples of your cheeks are. So if you are to smile, it's tracking that for the cheekbones. Now, that being said, for some people, the face is very activating. As you, I mean, shoot, I don't have to tell you that, you know that. And so it's counterintuitive. You wouldn't actually want to teach or go in with the face havening first. You always want to work your way up to the face havening, even though this is the strongest. So you're just kind of easing the system into the new touch. But yeah, it's just like right along the apples of the cheeks. And if you do work with Angie or Derek or Victoria and you learn a little bit more about facilitated havening, again, within your scope of practice, and it's not necessary, the way I do facilitated havening is usually it's the palm of my finger stroking right along the cheek like that. Really, and that's the speed I go. Helpful?
Does that answer the question? Just to point out, it's not a back and forth. There's a lot of people when I was walking, they're doing a sweeping back and forth, so it's just a one-time move. So I'm going to give the mic to Victoria.
And it's the same with oral aids, by the way. It's a specific stroke.
Yeah.
So when I was walking through some of the tables, some of you were going back and forth, and you want to start, finish, start, finish. You don't want to go back and forth. It's a very specific stroke.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So the main thing that we want to be incredibly mindful of, well, there's two pieces. One, the patient over time will identify what feels most comfortable for them. So in that situation, if most people won't feel comfortable going this direction because you start to pinch your nose. And why we want to not encourage that is, what's the only sense that has a direct line to the amygdala? Olfaction. Right? That's why it gets so, if somebody has a stuffy nose, Amy's going to light up around that if she has trauma. If somebody's in a state of activation and we want them to do breath work, I have them breathe through their mouth, because that motion will actually activate the amygdala, doing a quick breath in like that, because that stimulates or represents the fight or flight response. So if we're coming forward like that, we're squishing that space. Now, if somebody has a tension headache and they're choosing to do that, that's different. But still, even then, I'm just going to invite everybody to do this for a minute. Grip your nose like you would if you had a tension headache, and then run your fingers out along your cheeks. Right? You're encouraging the system to be expansive rather than contracted. If you come in, you're contracting it even more. With the arms, if up and down is more comfortable, that's fine. With your hands, whatever they want. Back hands, there's not the activation there. You do want palm and palm. The amount of clothing, a sweater is fine, a shirt is fine. If they have a big fluffy jacket on, so I was in Ohio doing a training with the Department of Defense, and they all had their huge fluffies on because it was like -13 degrees. And I had them all take those off because that will disrupt it. But layers of clothing are fine. If you are ever facilitating the havening touch, that's where boundaries are huge. And so we're very, very clear in only doing, the top of the arms, across the face and the hands. But again, unless you attend my full one day or attend a formal training with havening, I don't recommend going into the facilitated havening. If you want to use it with your spouse or a child, on the other hand, that's where, again, you just want to be really specific in your structure. And so I might turn this down. So it's just this part of the arm, just the hand. So I never touch this part of the arm ever. It's really intimate. And we don't have data there to show that anything's getting done. We have data here, hands, cheeks, and brow.
A number of you asked about the case for my grandson, and I'm just going to tell the story really quick for those that are our grandsons. So, daughter who's pregnant, very pregnant, and she was just trying to chill for a few minutes in her bedroom, and her older son comes in and says, "Mommy, I think I did something really bad." And boys will do that. Girls,
yeah,
boys pray about that stuff. So anyway, okay. I will defer to.
Okay, Bertha has this electric fuse. The door was locked to her bedroom. And was pounding outside. It says, "Mama, I think I did a bad thing."
Okay. So turns out what had happened was he said he locked his little brother in the closet. That's what he said. And the closet had a key lock, and Bertha didn't have the key. So it's locked, trapped. Let's just put it that way, locked, trapped. Okay. And so it's just, well, what do I do? And since it's not one that you could put a hairpin or something like that in, just call your husband's uncle and see if he's comfortable coming over and drilling it out. All right. Well, they drill it out, and that doesn't reveal the son that's screaming his head off, but the younger one. Turns out, long story short, the older brother had put him in a chest of drawers and closed the chest of drawers. Remember, we talked about Amy and trapped, and not want you to ever forget that. And so, but here's this fresh opportunity, just like she said, when the person had a panic attack, sort of coming up the stairs. It's like, yes. So here's Britta on the phone afterwards. So first I said, call me back after you get the door open. Well, that wasn't it. But if they find him, get him out. Now what do I do? And so I talked her through havening. Well, she's pregnant, so she's at risk too. So we do so she self-haven. She didn't know anything about it, but she does that. That brings that all the way down to 0 for her, and then she's able to do her son or something in that room and things like that. So everything's fine. The reason I bring this up is that in our dental office, a lot of times mom's just as traumatized as the child is, and mirror neurons, so the child is getting cues from mom or whichever parent is bringing it in. So there's nothing wrong with teaching the mom and having the mom turn them and do the check, except it takes a few more minutes. But how long did it take? We're talking 2-5 minutes, which is still a lot less than fighting something in the office and then having a bad outcome. So it's okay, and I'm so glad that this has been brought up this way, is that it's okay to do it third person perhaps, or even from a distance. It's okay to do that. It still works. It still works. I don't know.
Well, we do phone consults before anybody walks in the door. I spend 30, 45 minutes with somebody before they come in and pay to do work with us, to make sure that we have an expert on our staff that can support the journey they're looking to go on. And I had a young woman who I had his phone consult scheduled with and picked up the phone and called her at her scheduled time. And she picked up the phone and said, yeah, I programmed your number in because I knew you'd be calling. So I'm so glad you did, but I'm in the middle of a panic attack right now. I think I need to go to the hospital. And I could hear it. She was so hijacked. And I said, you know, can I just invite you to do something? And she's like, I think I need to go to the hospital. I'm like, well, I understand that. And so, you know, go ahead and call 911 or go ahead and go. But I just would like to invite you to start humming Mary Had a Little Lamb. And I want you to just hold your arms and start moving them up and down like you're giving yourself a nice hug. And I'm going to sing Mary Had a Little Lamb with you. And she's just like, what? And I'm like, just try this for a minute. And so she trusted me, and she did. And she calmed down. She completely came out of it in about a minute and a half. And she was flummoxed. She had no idea what had just happened. And I was just like, well, so that's because your amygdala is running the show. And, you know, let's help you come in and do some work. Now, the reason I felt safe to do that with her rather than saying you need to get straight to the hospital was that her cardiologist had referred her because she kept having panic attacks and thinking they're heart attacks, and her EKG's fine. Her heart health is fine. So in another situation without that data, I would have said, go to get yourself to the emergency room, get checked out, and then let's follow back up into your consult. So just to know medically, I had that data that most likely this was a panic attack, and taking an extra 2 minutes prior to calling 911 probably wouldn't harm her health. But it was incredible. She had no idea what we were doing or why we were doing it. She just trusted me. And her system completely calmed down.
It's very powerful, and we're dealing with anxiety all the time. That's like all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And we carry it with us, or our staff. And it's so nice to be able to think objectively, and it's hard to think objectively when we're still carrying that stuff around. So I think it's nice that when you go back to your office, you have your staff, you teach your staff these things as well.
Yes.
Remember it.
Yeah.
And it'll remind you, just like her husband reminded her when they were in India. Time. So I think that really is helpful. And how many of you have been frustrated trying to feel the cranial motion? Anyone get frustrated trying to feel the cranial? Okay.
Yeah.
Keep this in mind. This is a very powerful tool because you find all of a sudden there is that you're okay to be calm. Your brain will try to fill things in. That calm is uncomfortable for a dentist because typically the dentist, we're so busy. It's hard for us to sit still. How long did we sit still? She has crammed almost a 2-day seminar into this for us. You know how jam-packed it is information-wise. She's absolutely darling, does a wonderful job. But yet, as dentists, it's hard for us to stay calm because our office, our life is so staccato, you know. But so this is something that we can become familiar with by doing it. And as you teach your staff, when you find, well, it didn't take that long, and I see things differently. So I think it's very powerful. We don't have a way for her to come back online when we're back in our office. So we want to make the most use of this time we have right now with her.
And Derek, that's why I designed the group breakouts here. So my team and I, we do group havening. And it just looks exactly like that. We play brain games and we self-haven in the office to regulate. And what it does is it normalizes it for us, and it makes it just a part of the daily process of what we're doing with our patients. And so I really recommend that if you're please teach this to your team, and B, have it, maybe even if it's just a once a week team consultation, start team meeting with a brain game, you know, playing a word game or something. You know, take the word molar and then do your thing and do the geography brain game while everybody's self-havening, so that it just normalizes that it works and people get in the habit of going, oh, here's a thing, rather than it being a one-off that you go, oh, I learned this thing and then never use it.
Very good. Yeah, no one-offs. This is the thing. That's great. That's fantastic. Years ago, I took this got this PC equipment from China, which creates this, it's basically, once I put it into a subwoofer, it sounded like a Harley Davidson idling. And what I was trying to do is set a tone in my office of this calm, more alpha, a little bit theta-ish, and by having these rhythmic sounds that were not repetitive. But can you imagine what it's like if you sit down, you have your little staff meeting at the very beginning, you also place in the process, like she recommended, put an intention. What is one of the thoughts you have? When you put color to that thought, you're doing this, you're playing the game. Who knows, when people walk into the door, it's probably just as tangible as it is to you, even though they didn't even watch it happen. So I think that makes it a lot easier. You find all of a sudden, wow, this was an easy day, despite someone coming unglued. And it's just, which patients are likely to do, or someone about a bill or whatever. So that's, I think it's extremely powerful. The more we use it, the more powerful it becomes, the less frustrating it is when we're trying to understand something with a patient. And it's, any of you have any close family members that have dementia? And how well do your arguments go with them?
Yeah.
And this, as we do this, is the same thing with our patients. So as we do this, we find that we get the answer. How did she know, for those of you that have any questions, how did she know? And just slipped in and the answer was there for you. That's how this works. And we may not be able to put our finger on it, but I'll tell you it works that way. But trust me, trust her, because she does it. It's not just to be goofy. She does it. I go into her office just that one time, and there's a different spirit in her office than in another office. She knows it, that's what she's like. There is, and you create it by what you're doing. So.
We all create it by what we bring in, and I think the intention, and I think our patients feel it, and the rooms feel it and carry it. Yeah, but the havening energy is really interesting. I mean, just like a quantum physics, energy begets energy, and just walk in, it's just like, oh, soothe, okay, and then we keep going forward, and it's pretty cool. And when in a space where we do all deep level trauma work, where we hear the most horrific things all day long, and yet the energy feels like one of incredible expansiveness and healing. And we all walk out of the door after doing deep trauma work, and we're like, great, let's go live our life now. We're not carrying it with us because of being so intentional about doing our trauma reprocessing in ourselves, or soothing our systems on a regular basis when that stuff shows up, so that we're not, like Derek was describing, in that ongoing anxious state. And I can't even imagine. I mean, I've been in a dentist office, and I have good friends who are dentists, and whenever I go to their office, I mean, people are just running all the time. And so to have that running energy, but just be like, oh, but it's balanced.
And I think that's that ability to put it on hold or okay. So you're going to get, okay, this is a question, is there a script for the distraction techniques? And you will be getting handouts. She's put a lot of effort in to make it possible, because she knows how hard it is to remember everything that we just learned and then go home and implement it. So you're going to take and distribute it, and just ask others around you that are in this circle to help you with it, because on our own we can't, and we're not expected to have to control it. It's a very interesting thing. You have patients come in, and if you're treating pediatric cases, you know that the parents come in. There has to be a trust that's established there, because many times you're walking out in this environment with these patients. I have two girls that I got that were young girls were both class 3 cases. And can you imagine a mother that's a hygienist coming in one time and saying, in the middle of the process, and it's the middle, and they both turned out gorgeous, and the girls are both very, very happy. But let's think about this in the middle of that process. And the mother, who's a hygienist, says, well, we've got to talk for a minute, right? And she said, my daughters were in the office I work in, and after they were getting their cleanings done, all the dentists that work in that office were pulled into the room, and they're huddled over my daughters, and they're just waving their heads back and forth. This is basically, the guy doesn't know what he's doing. And she says, so what do I do? I said, what do you feel in your heart right now? And she said, I always feel good when I'm here with you. And I said, I can't live a lie. I know this works, but I can't, but you have to they feel that, and that's part of what keeps them on board when the treatment goes difficult. And how do you create that space by some of this, what you just